2 days later, as agreed, Chun Yo-won entered the throne room of the imperial palace. The emperor, who found it distasteful to formalize matters with an official document bearing the imperial seal, had deliberately refrained from summoning any other officials. When Yo-won presented the alternative of proceeding with the previously discussed non-aggression treaty should the emperor refuse, the proposal drew an unusual expression across the emperor's face. Internally, the emperor recognized that this was not a request, but a suggestion he was technically free to decline. He remained silent for a long while, weighing the matter with grave consideration. Only after prolonged deliberation did he finally respond, and at that moment, the corners of Chun Yo-won's lips lifted in clear satisfaction. 2 days had also passed since the incident at the royal shrine. During that time, a meeting was convened in Henan province at the main base of the Murim Alliance. The one who had called for this gathering was Elder Chung-soo, a veteran member of the alliance. Shock rippled through the hall as the attendees reacted to the revelation that the demonic cult leader had appeared within the imperial palace. Unable to comprehend how such a thing could have occurred, Chung-soo admitted that he did not know the full details, but stated that the second prince appeared to be involved in the matter. From the fourth seat, a middle-aged woman clad in a monk's robe intervened. She was Monk Sati of the Hangsan sect, an order composed solely of nuns who followed the teachings of Buddhism. With visible distress, she questioned how the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect had been able to use the Soul King to infiltrate the imperial palace. Her concern prompted Monk Guk Yan, the ambassador from the Sorim Temple, to speak. He warned that such a feat implied that the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect wielded far-reaching influence, enough to plunge the entire Jianghu into chaos. Peng Chong-won of the manhwa sect added that the danger extended beyond that alone, stating that even the standing of the Murim Alliance itself would be threatened. He expressed uncertainty over whether he should feel gratitude toward the demonic cult leader in light of those implications. Master Peng of the Peng sect responded sharply, remarking that Peng Chong-won had always shown excessive optimism toward the demonic cult leader ever since his visit to the demonic cult. Peng Chong-won retorted that Master Peng remained as hostile as ever, and remarked that such dedication to fulfilling one's duties as a martial artist was, at least, admirable. Enraged, Master Peng accused him of speaking with sarcasm. The reports were far from finished, yet the elders had already descended into open argument. Unable to endure the disorder any longer, Elder Chung-soo slammed his hand against the table, the sharp sound cutting through the room. He forcefully declared that he was not yet finished, and the severity of his demeanor left everyone momentarily stunned. At that point, the head of the Murim Alliance, the Righteous North Sword, Yi Monk, intervened. He stated that Chung-soo had yet to reach the core of the matter, and instructed him to finish what he had been saying. Once the hall finally settled into silence, Chung-soo resumed his report. He revealed that the emperor's personal guard, Lim Gyuhua, was none other than one of the 5 great martial artists from 9 decades ago, the Maelstrom Sword Emperor. The revelation alone left the assembly stunned, yet the words that followed struck them far harder. Chung-soo stated that the demonic cult leader had killed the Maelstrom Sword Emperor in an overwhelmingly one-sided battle, adding that the fight had been so lopsided that the emperor had been openly mocked. The room erupted in disbelief, with voices rising in shock at the claim that one of the 5 great martial artists could have fallen to what they described as a weak demonic cult leader. Others protested that the Maelstrom Sword Emperor had at least reached the mystic realm, placing him on equal footing with the head of the Murim Alliance, and insisted that Chun, the demonic cult leader, could not possibly have defeated one of the 5 great martial artists, even questioning whether Chung-soo had truly seen what he claimed. Chung-soo trembled as he affirmed his certainty, explaining that although he had witnessed countless members of the demonic cult over the years, this man was fundamentally different. Peng Chong-won began to question him, suggesting that such difference was only natural for a leader, but Chung-soo cut him off sharply. He clarified that he was not referring merely to martial prowess, and insisted that anyone who had seen the demonic cult leader would understand. He declared that the man had transcended humanity itself, and proposed that the title of demon god suited him best. Monk Sati responded by suggesting that Chung-soo's judgment had been clouded by the chaos he had endured, and advised him to calm himself. In response, Chung Chong-su shouted in frustration, demanding that they take him seriously. He asserted that the demonic cult leader had pierced the personal guard's absolute barrier using the formless sword and had subdued over 300 expert martial artists using nothing but his true energy. Yimok immediately interrupted, questioning whether Chong-su truly understood the implications of invoking the formless sword. Sweat poured down Chong-su's face as he answered that he did, declaring that the demonic cult leader had reached the life and death realm and stood as a divine master. The moment those words left his mouth, every face in the room stiffened. No martial artist could be ignorant of the formless sword, a supreme technique attainable only upon reaching the legendary divine master level. An uproar broke out at once, laughter mixed with outrage as some dismissed the claim as nonsense, while others insisted that attaining the divine master realm was impossible. The idea itself was simply too much to accept. Monk Sati then turned to Pung Chung-won, reminding him that he had seen the demonic cult leader recently, and arguing that there was no way someone could improve so drastically in such a short span of time. Chong-su let out a bitter breath, expressing his resignation at their refusal to believe him. Yimok, deep within his mind, grappled with the words he had just heard. The mention of the life and death realm defied belief, yet if Chong-su was speaking the truth, then the balance of power across the entire Jianghu stood on the brink of collapse. As the commotion continued, the doors to the meeting hall were suddenly thrown open. Everyone present had been instructed that no one was to interrupt unless the matter was urgent. The one who burst inside was Gam Woon. In a breathless rush, Gam Woon delivered an emergency report announcing that an urgent message had arrived from the Kaifeng branch. He revealed that the Imperial Palace had officially declared its decision to change the national religion of the Ming Empire to the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult. Yimok rose from his seat in stunned disbelief, unable to immediately process the announcement. It was further confirmed that Taoism, the empire's long-standing state religion, had been replaced. Meanwhile, in the imperial capital, Admiral Seo Taesik of the Cardinal Spear and Admiral Yuk of the West Spear knelt before the throne with their foreheads pressed to the floor. They pleaded with the emperor, insisting that they were not obligated to accept such a drastic proposal, and begging him to reconsider such a decision, warning that this was not the proper path for the empire. Admiral Yuk echoed the protest, urging the emperor to withdraw the declaration and arguing that while many arts and religions existed, the demonic cult should never be chosen. He stressed that the Sky Demon Order was not something the empire should follow and began to mention Chun Yo-won, stating that the man had shown disrespect toward the emperor. Before he could finish, the emperor struck the arm of his throne. With cold fury, he reminded them that they were never to mention what had occurred within the imperial tomb. Realizing the cause of the emperor's rage, Admiral Yuk fell silent at once. He begged for forgiveness, calling himself a lowly servant who had committed blasphemy, and repeatedly smashed his forehead against the floor in apology. After several impacts, blood began to trickle down his brow. Only then did the emperor raise his hand, signaling him to stop. Grateful for the mercy shown, Admiral Yuk expressed his thanks. The emperor then posed a question, asking what one should consider the enemy of their enemy to be. Seo Taesik answered cautiously, stating his belief that the enemy of one's enemy should be regarded as an ally. The emperor confirmed that this was the same answer given to him by cult leader Chun, and stated that the berserk saber of the six martial arts sect was an enemy that must be eliminated. Privately, the emperor reflected that there was a difference between Chun's question and his own, noting that Chun had asked what he would choose to do about such enemies. Seo Taesik continued, arguing that by that logic, the Murim Alliance was also an enemy of the berserk saber of the six martial arts sect, and that the alliance maintained friendly relations with the empire. The emperor responded by questioning what the Murim Alliance had truly done. He pointed out that one of the 17 masters had merely stood by and watched as he was humiliated, while subordinates weaker than that master had been willing to sacrifice their lives for the emperor's sake. Seo Taesik hesitated, but acknowledged that the berserk saber of the six martial arts sect was indeed a terrifying enemy. The emperor's anger flared as he declared that those enemies were targeting both the Great Ming Empire and himself. He demanded to know why the empire should not change its state religion if the Murim Alliance refused to help despite their existing ties. Seo Taesik fell silent, troubled deep within. He realized that he had misjudged the emperor's temperament. The emperor had always chosen whatever benefited him most in political matters. Yet even so, Seo Taesik could not ignore the fact that those people were still outlaws. Deep within his thoughts, the emperor reconsidered his intentions. He had originally planned to completely withdraw his hand from the Jianghu after this incident, yet the discovery that a spy had been planted within the Imperial Palace made it clear that they would not retreat so easily. His thoughts turned to Chun Yo-won, whose martial power far exceeded anything the Emperor had imagined. At the same time, his intelligence proved no less formidable. Yo-won had been shrewd enough to completely dismantle his enemy's schemes and seize control of one force by skillfully using another. Raising his voice, the Emperor declared that the sole reason he had designated the Sky Demon Order as the state religion was to eliminate the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. He made it unequivocally clear that he would not reverse this decision unless a better solution was presented. With no room left for interference, the two admirals were forced to withdraw their objections. The Emperor's stance left no opening for further debate. Through telepathic exchange, the admirals shared their thoughts and reached the conclusion that their only option was to devise a superior alternative. Meanwhile, at the Orthodox Miram Alliance headquarters in Hainan province, the announcement that the Emperor intended to change the official religion sent shockwaves through the alliance. The 17 masters convened for 3 consecutive days. They had originally intended to ally with the Heavenly Demon Divine cult to bring down the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect, and this turn of events was something none of them had ever anticipated. Another major point of contention was the martial power of Chun Yo-won. Those known to have mastered techniques on the level of the Formless Sword were all martial artists of extreme old age. Because of that, it was difficult for them to accept that someone as young as Chun Yo-won could have reached such an exalted realm. As confusion spread through the gathering, a guest arrived from the Imperial Palace, Miju, a eunuch of the Cardinal Spear. Monk Sathi sought confirmation, questioning whether the report was true. Miju affirmed it, explaining that the Emperor was willing to retract his decision if a better solution could be proposed. At those words, sighs escaped throughout the hall. Several leaders cast resentful glances toward Elder Chung Su. The eunuch had revealed something the elder had not disclosed. Some silently concluded that it was no wonder the Emperor was disappointed in them, while others felt that the prestige of Yulin had been severely diminished. Those resentful and distrustful gazes cornered Elder Chung Su, leaving him fully aware that nothing he said would now carry weight. Secretly, Chung Su lamented his situation. He had already spoken everything he could about how powerful Lord Chun truly was, yet he was still being treated with suspicion. He accepted that there was nothing more he could do, and reached the conclusion that continuing to work with the Muram Alliance would be difficult. Chung Su then stated that it was regrettable they had reached such a situation and announced his intention to excuse himself and take responsibility. Master Peng responded with open disdain, questioning whether Chung Su felt any guilt at all. He accused him of ignoring repeated offers of help meant to prevent this outcome and condemned him for ruining everything, only to attempt to withdraw now. As Chung Su began to rise from his seat, anger burned in his eyes. He remarked that Master Peng's reaction surprised him, as he had not expected him to speak up even if given 2 mouths. Faced with the continued provocation, Chung Su took a deep breath. He admitted that the situation arose because of his own powerlessness, yet asserted that even if Master Peng had been present, he would have been no different. He went so far as to say that he would stake his own arm on a chopping block to prove that Master Peng would have acted exactly the same. Enraged, Master Peng's face flushed red as he slammed his hand against the table and demanded to know whether Chung Su could take responsibility for such words. Chung Su replied that he would not speak without conviction and added that he was certain Master Peng would end up breaking something. Dismissing the remark, Master Peng claimed that such a thing was nothing to him. He then rose from his seat and turned toward the great leader, Yi Mok, declaring his intent to be sent to the Imperial Palace. He vowed to meet his Imperial Majesty personally, change his mind, and resolve the situation himself. Deep within his thoughts, Yi Mok felt a sense of approval. No one else had shown any willingness to step forward and attempt to resolve the crisis, making this development favorable in his eyes. He then asked Master Peng to confirm his resolve, seeking assurance that he was truly prepared. Inside his mind, Master Peng seized upon the moment. Having inherited his position directly from his father, he had never been given a proper chance to prove that he deserved it. To him, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With firm resolve, Master Peng declared that the task should be entrusted to him. At that moment, another figure stepped forward and requested to be sent to the Imperial Palace alongside Master Peng. The man was Yan Buso, the eldest son of Yi Mok. The Morim Alliance head had taken in 3 orphans as his children, Mo Yuju, Kang So, and Yan Buso. All 3 possessed outstanding martial talent, but Yan Buso's ability stood above the rest. His potential was so remarkable that 7 of the 17 masters had jointly taken part in raising and training him. Within his thoughts, Yi Mok considered the reason behind Yan Buso's sudden interest in the mission. He suspected it might be due to the demonic cult leader. Reflecting on his own past, Yi Mok recalled how he himself had often been compared to the former demonic cult leader. He recognized that rivalry was a powerful catalyst for growth. Although the mission carried danger, he judged it to be an invaluable opportunity for Yan Buso to gain real experience. With a faint smile, Yi Mok granted his permission and allowed Yan Buso to proceed as he wished. Yan Buso expressed his gratitude. Master Peng reacted with visible excitement, remarking on the honor of having Yan Buso accompany him. Yan Buso responded humbly, acknowledging that he was still lacking, but wished to offer whatever help he could. Master Peng, emboldened by the support, joked that Master Chung Su should now be worried about his arm. He felt genuinely uplifted by the unexpected backing. In less than 3 months since Yan Buso had joined him to refine his martial abilities, the young man had already been recognized for his skill. Chung Su observed the scene quietly. Considering temperament alone, he believed that Peng Muwol would have been far more suited to the role of a master. He recalled how his warnings had been ignored by Master Peng and reflected that the demonic cult lord was not one who showed mercy. Chung Su doubted that Master Peng would die for the sake of the alliance, yet he found himself curious about the expression Master Peng would wear upon his return. At noon on the 3rd day, members of the Cardinal Spear and the envoy from the Morim Alliance arrived at the Imperial Palace of the Great Ming Empire. At the gate, Miju of the Cardinal Spear presented his identification plaque and ordered the guards to quickly prepare entry passes for the Morim Alliance delegation. The guards complied without delay. Miju then apologized and informed them that they would need to wait briefly. Master Peng accepted calmly, remarking that it was not a problem, and expressing his hope that Miju would not need to intervene. Monk Sathi reflected that had Great Master Gukyan been present, Buddhism could have been proposed as an alternative state faith, and resolved to do her utmost in his absence. Master Peng responded that Gukyan had his own responsibilities and suggested they speak further only after meeting His Imperial Majesty. He noted that the temples had not yet been closed, implying that persuasion might still be possible, and then turned his attention to Yan Buso, observing that it must be disappointing for him that the demonic cult leader was not present. Yan Buso laughed lightly and agreed. Within his thoughts, Yan Buso accepted that this meeting had simply not been meant to be. He had wanted to see the demonic cult leader's strength firsthand, especially after hearing such high praise from Jagal Sohi. Since the Emperor's personal guard's body had not yet been cremated, he considered the possibility of examining the injuries. Only a few months earlier, he had heard that the man was merely at the evolutionary realm, yet he had already advanced enough to wield the formless sword. Regardless, one fact was undeniable to him. The demonic cult leader had grown stronger. He found that realization intriguing, and concluded that perhaps the heavens themselves did not wish for Orthodox Murim and him to prosper together. After entering the Jianghu, Yan Buso had fought countless expert martial artists, yet he could not conceal his disappointment. No one of his age had proven worthy of standing as his rival. At present, only a handful among the 17 masters could defeat him in a duel, and it was through this reality that he had come to recognize his own genius. He then resolved that if the demonic cult leader truly was his destined rival, the heavens would one day guide them to cross paths, even if the man attempted to avoid him. At that moment, a eunuch of the Cardinal Spear emerged hurriedly from the south gate and ran toward them, urgently announcing that there was a problem. Miju asked whether the entry passes had been brought. The eunuch confirmed that they had, but hesitated. Miju ordered him to calm himself. The eunuch then revealed that with the arrival of the demonic cult's disciples that morning, the shutdown of the temples had been moved forward. The revelation stunned everyone present. Miju declared that there was no time to waste and insisted that they meet His Imperial Majesty immediately. Monk Sathi cried out in alarm and resolved to attempt to stop the temples from being shut down herself. With that decision made, Miju, Master Ping, and Yan Buso rushed toward the Imperial Palace. Deep within, Yan Buso felt a surge of excitement, wondering whether this meant that the demonic cult leader had also returned. Meanwhile, at a temple located southeast of the Dragon Palace, within the Three Purities Hall, chaos had already erupted. Violent unrest consumed the grounds as heavy impacts echoed through the air. The monks attempted to resist and demanded that the destruction stop, condemning the intruders' actions, yet their efforts were futile, and they were completely overwhelmed. The members of the demonic cult, who had arrived an hour earlier, methodically removed books and teaching tools from the temple halls. The monks protested desperately, denouncing them as evil demons and declaring the place a sacred Taoist temple, but their resistance was met with violence. One monk was struck down, his body kicked aside as a cult member coldly declared that under His Majesty's orders, the temple was to be dismantled and replaced with a Sky Demon Order shrine, warning that leaving quietly would be the wiser choice. Enraged and wounded, a monk shouted that they would not dare act so freely if emissaries of the Murim Alliance were present, hurling curses at them. The demonic cult members only grew irritated. At that moment, Hobam, standing in the temple's front yard, ignited a spark in his palm. With a roaring sound, he hurled the flame toward a small tree, which immediately burst into fire. The monks cried out in horror, unable to comprehend the nature of the art being used, condemning it as demonic. Hobam issued a blunt warning, declaring that he would burn anyone who tried to interfere and ordering them to leave while he was still being lenient. Just then, a group of nuns rushed into the temple grounds. Their sudden arrival startled the demonic cult members. Steel rang sharply as the nuns drew their swords in unison and formed a defensive line, blocking further entry. They were disciples of the Hangzhen sect. Monk Sati arrived with them, expressing relief that they had not come too late. She acknowledged the alliance between their sides, but firmly stated that there were lines that must never be crossed. Hobam questioned her authority to speak of such limits. Sati studied him carefully. He appeared no older than 20, yet the pressure of his presence was unmistakable. She judged him to be at the evolutionary realm. For a brief moment, she understood how Chung Su could have mistaken him for someone at the life and death realm, though she concluded with certainty that he was not. She then identified herself as the head of the Hangzhen sect and demanded that Hobam and his cult members leave immediately. Hobam responded with a vacant expression, as though he could not grasp her meaning. Irritation flared in Sati as she accused him of sly provocation and reminded him that this was Orthodox Alliance territory, warning him not to violate the Alliance's rules. Hobam questioned when the Imperial Palace had ever become her domain. At those words, Sati's gaze turned icy. Drawing her sword, she felt confident in her ability to defeat him. She issued a final warning, declaring that he had brought this upon himself and that he would regret it. Before she could move, Chun Yo-won appeared directly behind her. His presence was so complete that she sensed no energy at all. The sudden voice froze her in shock as she instinctively tried to create distance, but Yo-won's hand closed around her neck from behind. He stated calmly that she had attacked first. She cried out and attempted to strike his hand by gathering her internal energy, but the moment Yo-won's energy flowed into her, her entire body went numb, leaving her completely paralyzed. Overwhelmed by the crushing disparity in power, Monk Sati turned her eyes toward the demonic cult members. In unison, they dropped to their knees, pressed their hands together, and shouted reverently, addressing Chun Yo-won by name as they offered their greetings. Realization struck her like lightning. Her eyes widened as the identity of the man gripping her neck became unmistakably clear. The nuns cried out in shock as they witnessed their master, renowned as an unparalleled swordswoman, being subdued so effortlessly, immobilized while held by the throat, unable to resist in any way. One of Monk Sati's disciples urgently transmitted a message, warning that if this continued, their master would be killed. A second disciple echoed the alarm. Snapped back to clarity by their pleas, Monk Sati ordered them to execute the Sword of Collective Harmony. The two proud disciples of the Hangzhen sect moved as one, unleashing their combined technique. They attacked Chun Yo-won simultaneously from his left and right, demanding that he release their master and hurling curses at him as the Lord of the demonic cult. What met them was something they never anticipated. Before their blades could reach Yo-won, Markim and Ko Wang-hul intercepted the attacks. With a single exchange, the two nuns were struck down and sent crashing violently into the courtyard wall. Ko Wang-hul smiled coldly and chastised them, stating that such disrespect was not how one should address the demon lord. Racked with pain, the nuns lay stunned. Deep within, they reeled at the realization that such overwhelming force had come from a single strike. alike, and that the man before them possessed terrifying skill. Hobum turned toward Ko Wang-hul and called out to him warmly, recognizing an old companion. Wang-hul greeted him in return, remarking that it had been a long time, and noting how busy Hobum had been following the Demon Lord. As Wang-hul observed him more closely, a chill ran through his thoughts. He had once taken pride in being the only member of the Six Swords troop to reach the evolutionary realm, yet the aura emanating from Hobum told a different story. From what he sensed, Hobum had clearly advanced to a higher realm. If that impression was correct, then Hobum would soon surpass everyone and claim the top position within the Six Swords troop. At that moment, Monk Sati shouted in fury, declaring that Yowon had brought this upon himself. Immediately afterward, she began forcefully circulating her internal energy, gathering it near her chest. Unable to break free from Chun Yo-won's grip, she resolved to use her own body as a conduit to escape and release the accumulated energy. The result was devastating. The stone slab beneath Yowon's feet shattered with a violent crack. Yowon had calmly guided the invading energy through his own meridians and expelled it downward through his legs, dispersing it completely. Horror flooded Monk Sati's mind. She could not believe what she had just witnessed. Her indirect strike, a technique she had fully mastered, had been effortlessly neutralized. In that moment, she understood that Elder Chung Su's warnings had been true all along. While Monk Sati remained trapped in a void of shock, Chun Yo-won addressed her, remarking that she appeared to be a monk of strong resolve. The comment flushed her face with embarrassment, and she hastily tried to explain herself. She identified herself as a member of the Miram Alliance, emphasized that the alliance was allied with the demonic cult, and suggested that a misunderstanding had occurred. She pleaded to be released so the matter could be resolved through proper discussion. In the instant her words ended, something flashed past her left shoulder. At first, there was no pain. A heartbeat later, an indescribable agony tore through her nerves. A dull thud followed as her severed left arm fell to the ground. Another heavy impact echoed as Yo-won flung her body onto the floor. Yo-won stated that, as a courtesy to the alliance, he would limit his action to taking only her left arm. The sight of their revered master's severed arm lying on the ground plunged the remaining Hangson nuns into terror. Yo-won immediately issued his command, ordering that all of them be bound, granting permission to kill them should they resist. The demonic cult members responded without hesitation and acknowledged the order. At the same moment, within the Dragon Palace's throne room where the Emperor resided, heavy impacts echoed repeatedly across the floor. Cries rang out as 12 eunuchs of the Cardinal Spear knelt helplessly, unable to straighten their legs. Master Peng watched Yanbuso's display with disbelief forming deep within his thoughts. He had considered such a possibility, yet witnessing Yanbuso reach the evolutionary realm at such a young age left him shaken. To him, it felt as though he was witnessing the birth of what might become the strongest martial artist in the world. The Emperor calmly ordered that it was enough. Master Peng excitedly drew attention to Yanbuso's performance, declaring that this was the martial prowess of a man destined to become one of the 5 great martial artists of Zhongyuan. The Emperor responded with indifference, repeating the title with little interest. Inside his thoughts, Master Peng resolved that the Emperor needed to clearly understand that it was the Miram Alliance, not the demonic cult, that protected the Imperial Palace. He reassured himself that Yanbuso had fulfilled his role. Soon after, the Emperor released a quiet sigh and snapped his fingers. As if awaiting the signal, eunuchs emerged simultaneously from every corner of the hall. Master Peng tried to speak in alarm, but the Emperor interrupted him. He stated that 300 was the number of people the demonic cult leader had forced to kneel with nothing more than a flick of his hand. He then addressed Yanbuso directly, confirmed his name, and commanded him to attempt the same feat. The unexpected order caused Yanbuso's eyes to widen in astonishment. Within his mind, disbelief surged. He questioned whether he had heard correctly. While even the Peng Patriarch could defeat such people individually, forcing 300 to kneel using only true energy was an entirely different matter. Even if he exerted himself to the utmost, he believed he might manage 100 at best, and only for a limited time. The idea of subduing 300 with a mere flick of the hand was something he could not accept as possible. The Emperor questioned Yanbuso's hesitation, asking whether he was incapable of performing the feat. Through telepathy, Master Peng reassured Yanbuso that his majesty was exaggerating and likely only wanted a display of skill. Within his thoughts, Yanbuso agreed, convincing himself that rumors were always inflated. defeated. Still, being forced to prove himself in this manner stirred something within him. He accepted that the demonic cult leader truly stood as his rival. Yanbuso then stated that he was capable of complying, yet explained that imitating another's technique would be disrespectful to both himself and the demonic cult leader. Instead, he declared that he would demonstrate something different. The Emperor showed interest in this alternative. At that moment, the swords hidden at the waists of 3 nearby eunuchs were abruptly pulled free. With sharp metallic cries, the blades tore themselves from their scabbards, leaving the eunuchs frozen in shock and embarrassment. The 3 swords hovered in the air, moving as if endowed with life. The Emperor's eyes brightened instantly. He identified the technique as Chi sword control and questioned the Hallmaster to confirm it. The Hallmaster affirmed that it was an extremely advanced art, one that only those on the level of the 5 great martial artists of the Jianghu might achieve. The Emperor asked whether the demonic cult leader was also counted among the 5. The Hallmaster replied that he was not, though the former demonic cult leader had once held such a position. Inside his mind, the Emperor reevaluated what he had heard. The 5 great martial artists were said to possess overwhelming power, yet the demonic cult leader appeared to stand beyond even that measure. Someone capable of becoming one of the 5 was already extraordinary, yet even that might not be enough. He scoffed at the thought that sending a youth like Yanbuso could amount to anything meaningful, wondering whether the young man would be able to maintain his confidence when faced with Chun-Yo-Won. Unaware of the Emperor's thoughts, Yanbuso considered what he could show next to truly sway his majesty. He soon made his decision. With his toe, he drew a circle on the floor around himself. He declared that he could defend against all of the eunuchs' attacks without stepping outside that circle. The Emperor responded with clear sarcasm, remarking that it should be interesting. Yanbuso informed the eunuchs that if they managed to force him beyond the circle, he would accept defeat. In that same instant, he moved his hand. The 3 swords suspended in the air surged forward, accelerating as they darted between the eunuchs and traced countless intersecting paths. Shrill, cutting sounds echoed as the air swords sliced through the gaps between them, unleashing violent gusts of wind. The force struck like a sudden storm. The eunuchs cried out as the pressure slammed into them, the wind nearly tearing them off their feet. The area around Yanbuso resembled the eye of a raging typhoon. Eunuchs who rushed in were hurled backward, crashing to the floor one after another. Despite the overwhelming display, the Emperor watched on with an expression that remained distinctly unimpressed. Delighted by the outcome of his display, Yanbuso began to address the Emperor, but his words were cut short. The Emperor interrupted him at once, dismissing the performance as insufficient and questioning whether that was all he could show. Within Yanbuso's mind, shock rippled through him. He could not understand the Emperor's clear disappointment and wondered whether his display had truly failed to impress at all. Master Peng immediately protested, insisting that what Yanbuso had just demonstrated was impossible for anyone unworthy of standing among the 5 great martial artists. The Emperor shut him down without hesitation, stating that he was fully aware of who the 5 great martial artists of the Jianghu were, and acknowledging that Yanbuso was indeed skilled. The Emperor then posed a sharp question, asking whether Yanbuso could defeat his own father within 3 moves. The unexpected challenge made Yanbuso's eyes waver. No matter how much his abilities had grown, his father was still a supreme master. Defeating such a figure in 3 strikes was beyond something he could confidently claim. When Yanbuso hesitated in silence, the Emperor waved his hand dismissively and declared that his decision remained unchanged, ordering them to leave. Deep inside, Master Peng sensed disaster. If matters continued this way, the Sky Demon Order would be fully established as the state religion. Dropping to his knees, Master Peng begged the Emperor, stating that he understood His Majesty's disappointment and pleading for reconsideration. Before he could finish, urgent shouts erupted from outside the hall. The Emperor demanded to know the cause of the disturbance. A monk rushed in and knelt, formally greeting the Emperor of the Great Ming Empire. The Emperor expressed irritation, pointing out that he was already in the middle of a discussion and questioning the source of the commotion. The monk desperately pleaded for the talks to continue, reminding the Emperor that Taoism had flourished since the era of the first Emperor, and questioning how the Empire could allow the demonic cult to enter and dismantle its temples. At those words, Yanbuso's lips curled into a grin. He immediately realized the implication, that the demonic cult leader had arrived. He transmitted a message to Master Peng, remarking that matters would now become far simpler. Master Peng responded in alarm, sensing Yanbuso's intent. Yanbuso replied with confidence, declaring that he would personally fight the demonic cult leader and bring an end to the situation. The Emperor stated coldly that his mind would not be changed and dismissed them, provided they understood his stance. Yanbuso acknowledged the dismissal. Meanwhile, the monk continued to beg desperately for the Emperor to reconsider, his pleas echoing through the hall. Within the Emperor's thoughts, he observed that they were leaving because they had effectively given up, yet their true intention was obvious. Yanbuso's eyes had sparked the instant the demonic cult leader was mentioned. He reflected that arrogance could easily lead a man to his death, and concluded that he had already tried to save the two of them. With that, Master Peng, Yanbuso, and the Murim Alliance members rushed toward the southeastern section of the Imperial Palace. While moving, Yanbuso asked whether Miju had also seen the demonic cult leader. Miju admitted that he had not seen him directly. He confessed that even recalling the feeling of encountering that man before was difficult to put into words, stating that the demonic cult leader was not human, correcting himself to call him a monster, and then declaring him a demon god. Inside his mind, Yanbuso recalled that those were the very same words Chung Su had used. His reason warned him that this was dangerous, yet he found himself unable to suppress the thrill rising within his chest. Suddenly, the eunuch pointed ahead toward a structure resembling a temple. They had expected fierce fighting, especially since Monk Sati had not returned, yet the surroundings were unnervingly quiet. Through a narrow gap in the temple gates, they saw figures kneeling inside. The sight revealed the truth. Those kneeling were the female disciples of the Hangsen sect. Master Peng's expression twisted in disbelief and rage. He immediately ordered Yanbuso to let him attack first and commanded the warriors of the Peng sect to draw their swords, declaring that it was time to rescue their brothers and sisters. Without waiting, he charged forward. With explosive force, he smashed through the temple gates in a single burst. Yanbuso attempted to follow, but a sudden chill ran through him. He sensed something, an unfamiliar pressure, unmistakably energy. Alarmed, he tried to stop Master Peng, but it was too late. Master Peng had already surged inside, releasing his power as he searched for an opponent. The instant his eyes landed on the figures ahead, he identified them as superior masters. He fixed his gaze on Hobam, mistaking him for the demonic cult lord due to the foreign aura faintly leaking from him. When he glanced at Yowon, he felt nothing at all. Interpreting that absence as weakness, Master Peng chose Yowon as his first target. He swung his blade, aiming to take Yowon's head in a single strike. The outcome shattered his expectations. Yowon's head should have been severed, yet it slipped aside, leaving behind only an afterimage. As he frantically tried to locate him, Yowon reappeared beside him and seized his right arm. In the next instant, Yowon's energy sliced cleanly through flesh and bone. A scream tore from Master Peng as his arm was severed. Yowon commanded him to kneel. The loss of his arm threw Master Peng's body off balance, and at the same time, an invisible force slammed down upon him. Yowon snapped his foot down and stepped firmly onto Master Peng's head. Master Peng's vision wavered as he blinked, and the words once spoken by Elder Chung Su resurfaced within his mind. Words that now felt terrifyingly accurate, describing Yowon not as a man, but as the demon god himself. Shocked by the sound, Yanbuso and the warriors of the Peng sect rushed through the gate and into the temple. What greeted them was a sight they could not comprehend. Master Peng, who had charged in moments earlier with unrestrained confidence, was now kneeling helplessly before someone. Confusion turned to horror as Yanbuso noticed that Master Peng's right arm was gone. Blood poured relentlessly from the fresh wound. Terror crept through Yanbuso as he stared at the scene, unable to grasp how such devastation had occurred in such a short span of time. Yowon casually wiped the blood splattered across his face, using Master Peng's severed arm. He then turned his gaze toward them, his presence saturated with killing intent, conveying that far too many people seemed eager to lose their arms that day. The Hebei Peng sect was renowned throughout Murim, ranked among the top 3 blade sects. Peng Mual, born of a different mother, and Master Peng Gyu himself, the patriarch of the Hebei Peng sect, were both counted among the top 5 bladesmen of the Orthodox Murim Alliance. Master Peng had harbored ambitions of becoming a central figure within the alliance. However, the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect possessed overwhelming strength and insufficient information existed to oppose them directly. That was when Master Peng had identified an opportunity opportunity, with the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult declared the official religion of the Great Ming Empire, and Chung Su stepping down from his position as the 12th seat due to his involvement. Master Peng believed advancement was inevitable. He was confident that the remaining masters would be promoted, yet that alone was not enough. He wanted to rise higher and faster. In that moment, every one of those ambitions lay shattered beyond repair. Yanbuso forced himself to regain composure and swiftly surveyed the surroundings. He raised his hand, halting the Peng sect warriors before they could recklessly advance. Turning his gaze to the right, he saw the monks of the Hangsen sect kneeling. Relief washed through him when he realized they were still alive. Suddenly, demonic cult members sealed off the entrance. At their center stood a figure wearing a distinctive mask. Recognition struck instantly: the Dark King, the infamous great guardian of the demonic cult. Fear spread through the Peng sect warriors as they realized the severity of the situation. Sensing that escape was no longer an option, Yanbuso broke into a heavy sweat. Deep within, certainty formed that this was the demonic cult leader. The crushing aura emanating from him was utterly unnatural for someone of his age. Yanbuso could not even discern his martial realm. The urge to fight surged violently within him, but he restrained himself, knowing this was not the moment. After steadying his breath, Yanbuso stepped forward and formally introduced himself, stating his identity as the eldest son of the Murim Alliance leader and the captain of the White Ring squad. From the side, Hobam and Ko Wang-hul observed him in silence. They recognized him as the rising candidate rumored to become one of the top 5 martial artists of the Zhonghu. To them, the fact that the Murim Alliance had sent someone of his stature made one thing clear: the Alliance was deeply anxious. Yowen studied Yanbuso in silence. He recognized him as the son of the righteous North Sword, and recalled that there had once been a time when the two of them had been compared to one another. Stepping away from Master Peng's broken form, Yowen addressed Yanbuso, acknowledging him as the current representative of the Murim Alliance. Yanbuso accepted that assessment without hesitation. Yowen then stated in an icy tone that Yanbuso must therefore be prepared to bear the consequences of attacking the demonic cult. The moment those words reached him, Master Peng regained clarity. Panic surged through him as he resolved that Yanbuso had to be protected at all costs. He urgently sent a telepathic warning, pleading with Yanbuso not to fight and insisting that confronting Yowen was pure folly. He urged him to abandon the matter of the official religion altogether. Yanbuso met Master Peng's gaze and slowly shook his head. Before Master Peng could continue, Yanbuso stepped forward toward Yowen and issued an apology on behalf of the Murim Alliance. Yowen observed him closely. Based on Yanbuso's posture and movement, he had appeared ready to charge moments earlier, yet it now seemed clear that he had no intention of fighting. Yanbuso explained that from the Alliance's perspective, it had felt as though the demonic cult had taken the position of official religion from them. Because of that belief, they had done everything possible to try to change His Imperial Majesty's decision. On that basis, he stated that Yowen also bore part of the responsibility. Yowen questioned what he meant by that. Yanbuso clarified that as allies facing a common enemy, such an outcome should not have fractured their relationship. He stated that the Murim Alliance was willing to step back and relinquish the issue of the official religion entirely. In return, he requested that Yowen release the Hangsen sect's disciples and the two masters. Within Master Peng's thoughts, surprise surfaced. He had expected Yanbuso to retreat completely, yet instead he had chosen a calculated and dignified approach. Monk Sathi, reflecting quietly, also believed that this was the best possible course under the circumstances. From her perspective, since Yanbuso was willing to concede the religious issue, the demonic cult leader should have no reason to refuse. Yanbuso bowed once more and pressed his request. Yowen immediately rejected the premise. He stated that Yanbuso was misunderstanding the situation. The decision to give up the matter of the official religion was not something Yanbuso had any right to make. He reminded him that the Murim Alliance had attacked first, and only now, after failing to sway the Emperor and realizing the overwhelming disadvantage, were they attempting to appear reasonable. Yowen's hand closed around the hilt of his saber. He accused them of striking first and then trying to mask their retreat as consideration once defeat became inevitable. He expressed clear disappointment and stated that he was not a merciful man. Drawing his saber, Yowen declared with cold certainty that he would only be satisfied after taking Yanbuso's arm. Yanbuso immediately understood that negotiation was no longer possible. Sweat poured from him as he reacted to the declaration, recognizing how grim the situation had become. Meanwhile, Monk Sathi reflected with heavy resignation. She regretted regretted the fate awaiting the two masters. Her intention had been to prevent sacrifices by avoiding battle, yet she now accepted that there was no longer any choice. Yanbuso drew his sword and spoke with forced composure, admitting that in truth he felt relieved. He assumed Yowon was reacting this way because he acknowledged his strength and regarded him as a heaven-sent rival. He declared that he too was known as a genius within the Orthodox. Before he could finish, a chill surged through his right arm. The speed was so overwhelming that Yanbuso could not even register what had occurred. A drop of blood fell, followed by a dull thud, as the arm holding his blade hit the stone floor. A scream tore from his throat as pain finally caught up. Yowon's low voice reached him amid the agony, questioning what value the title of genius held. The pain intensified, and Yanbuso forced himself backward, widening the distance between them. He had expected to be driven back by the gap in their strength, but he had never imagined losing his arm without even seeing the attack. Within his mind, disbelief churned as he realized he had not perceived Yowon's movement at all, only the unimaginable density of his energy. Yowon stepped on the severed arm, a grin spreading across his face, and asked whether Yanbuso still wished to continue now that he had taken what he wanted. For the first time, the usually composed Yanbuso spoke with open fury. He demanded how Yowon dared to humiliate him. Using his blood points, he forcibly sealed the bleeding and charged. With a sweep of his remaining hand, Yanbuso sent the three blades into motion. They blurred through the air, distorting vision as they rushed toward Yowon. Deep down, he believed that even ghost-like speed would not be enough to escape this attack. The sword spun in a circular path, the compressed wind exploding into a raging tornado. Those witnessing it for the first time stared in disbelief. Even the Peng sect members shouted for everyone to retreat as trees were torn from the ground by the storm. Descending from above, Yanbuso resolved to strike Yowon down. Yowon calmly extended his hands toward the oncoming blades. The air swords halted instantly, frozen mere inches from him. Startled, Yanbuso poured more force into the technique, yet the swords remained completely still. They did not tremble. They did not move. Even his father had never been able to stop air swords so absolutely. Yowon told him that he should have stopped the moment his arm was severed. With a faint motion of Yowon's hand, the blades reversed direction. Yowon issued his command, and the swords moved in perfect synchronization toward Yanbuso. In a violent instant, the blades pierced both of his thighs and his opposite shoulder. A hoarse cry escaped him as he stared down in disbelief at his own weapons embedded in his body. The disparity was merciless, almost obscene. Inside, despair surged as he questioned whether Yowon had already reached the Divine Master realm. Only then, after being struck down so completely, did Yanbuso truly face reality, just as the other leaders had before him. He finally understood that this man stood on an entirely different plane. Yowon had never been his rival. That man was, without question, the demon god. It felt as though the end was approaching. In battle, such an outcome followed naturally. Through labored breaths and tearing pain, Yanbuso questioned what Yowon intended to do next. He asked whether Yowon planned to kill him and warned that such an act would turn the Miram Alliance into his enemy. Yowon immediately dismissed the words as nonsense and questioned why he would bother killing him at all. When Yanbuso demanded an explanation, Yowon looked down at him with open cynicism and stated that Yanbuso was far more useful alive, as a hostage who could be exploited whenever the need arose. The implication left Yanbuso unable to respond. His thoughts stalled completely as the weight of those words settled in. Yowon then asked him once more whether he still wished to continue. At that moment, Master Peng, utterly powerless, transmitted a desperate telepathic order to his sect members, instructing them to lay down their weapons. He admitted that it was disgraceful, but survival took precedence over pride. Without hesitation, the warriors of the Peng sect surrendered. One by one, they dropped their swords, choosing submission to prevent any further bloodshed. Within Master Peng's mind, the scene felt unreal. It resembled an adult overpowering a child, even though Yanbuso had already reached the mystic realm. He realized with dread that the higher one ascended through the martial realms, the more terrifying the gaps between them became. Enlightenment at the supreme peak demanded decades of cultivation, yet Yowon had advanced to this level within mere months. Even if they were fortunate enough to be spared and released, Master Peng feared that Chung Su might one day claim his remaining arm as payment for this catastrophe. The front yard of the temple was nearly packed with prisoners. Around 40 members of the Peng family lay prostrate on the ground, along with roughly 50 women from the Surim temple and the temple's instructors. Fear weighed heavily on all of them as they kept their heads lowered. From the top step of the main hall, Hobum voiced his concern. He noted that while none of them had been killed, both leaders and the son of the Murim Alliance head had been severely injured, and questioned whether this would work against them. Ko Wang-hul laughed it off, explaining that the alliance had been formed solely to oppose the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. If that alliance were to collapse, it would result in a war on multiple fronts. From his perspective, Yanbuso's actions had merely been an attempt to escape the situation alive. Yowon confirmed that assessment. Relief washed over Hobum as he admitted that he had worried for nothing. Wang-hul added that the Murim Alliance was boxed in on all sides, with the Unorthodox Alliance to the west, the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect to the east, and the demonic cult to the south. Under such pressure, breaking the alliance would be an act of pure foolishness. Hobum then asked what would be done with the captives. Yowon stated that everyone except Yanbuso and the two masters would be sent back. Wang-hul volunteered to personally go to the Murim Alliance and deliver Yowon's message. Yowon declined, reasoning that Wang-hul could instead be taken hostage and used for an exchange. A letter, he said, would be sufficient. Hobum remarked that the entire Jonghu now knew how powerful Yowon was, and suggested that a title might soon follow. 3 days later, at the Orthodox Murim Alliance, the prisoners taken by the demonic cult were returned. Disbelief spread as the survivors recounted what had happened. Gukyan, the second leader of the Sorim Temple and its ambassador, listened with a grim expression as it was stated plainly that even Yanbuso had been no match. Oseon of the Hangsen sect recalled the confrontation, and the more details that emerged, the more it sounded like a completely one-sided suppression. Some questioned whether Yowon had truly seized control of Yanbuso's air swords and turned them against him, though such a thing seemed impossible to accept. Quietly, doubts surfaced about whether Elder Chung-su's words had been true all along. It was a story no one had been ready to believe at the time, yet any martial artist understood what it implied. After a long silence, Peng Chung-won asked the Peng family's warriors about the object strapped to one of their backs. At that, the man's face darkened. The hall master of the Peng sect explained that the demonic cult leader had instructed him to ensure it was delivered directly to the Murim Alliance head. The mention of the demonic cult leader drew everyone's attention. The man stepped forward, untied the wooden box he carried, and placed it before Yimok's seat. When the lid was opened, the expressions of those present froze. Inside the box lay 3 severed arms. One, clad in a gray monk's robe, belonged to Monk Sathi. Another, powerfully built, belonged to Master Peng. The last, wrapped in a white sleeve, belonged to Yanbuso. Yimok was consumed by rage the moment he saw his son's severed arm. With a sharp surge of energy, the arm wrapped in a white sleeve lifted from the wooden box and flew into his grasp. His eyes shook violently as he stared at it, fury roiling uncontrollably. The name of the demonic cult leader echoed inside his chest, and the calm composure he had maintained for decades shattered like a lake caught in a storm. He questioned whether this act was meant to mock him, whether it was a deliberate test born from the belief that he lacked the resolve to break the alliance. Then, something unusual caught his attention. The severed hand was tightly clenched, as though gripping something. He tried to pry it open, but the fingers were locked with unnatural force. After a brief pause, Yimok sent his energy into the wrist. Only then did the rigid fingers slowly loosen, revealing a piece of paper folded with extreme care. The moment he saw it, disbelief stirred within him. He questioned why the demonic cult leader would go so far as to conceal a message, even after hiding it inside a severed hand. As his eyes moved across the contents, his expression shifted sharply. No one else noticed. Unaware of what Yimok had discovered, the leaders continued their grave discussion. Peng Chung-won questioned the intent behind such a message. Monk Guk-yan responded that it was clearly a warning, one meant to stop them from attempting to overturn the emperor's decision regarding the national religion. He stated that the current demonic cult leader was even more dangerous than his predecessor, and admitted that both the situation and the Murim Alliance's standing were rapidly deteriorating. Privately, Guk-yan concluded that the demonic cult under Chun Yeo-won was more threatening than even the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. At that moment, Yimok gently placed Yanbuso's severed arm back down. After finishing the message, he finally spoke. He announced that he was presenting a proposal. The word alone unsettled the hall. Yi-mok continued in a low, unwavering voice, declaring that he proposed breaking the alliance with the demonic cult. The sudden declaration plunged the room into confusion. Guk-yeon responded cautiously, stating that while he did not openly oppose the decision, the timing felt dangerously premature. Pong Chung-won reacted far more strongly, imploring Yi-mok to reconsider and warning that dissolving the alliance went too far. Yi-mok then asked whether the others shared that opinion. As expected, all gazes turned toward the third leader, Namgung, the master of the Blue Heaven Society. For any proposal to stand, it needed opposing perspectives. Within Pong Chung-won's thoughts, certainty formed. The Namgung patriarch was famously radical, someone who had opposed the alliance with the demonic cult even when the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect had emerged. He was also one of Yeon Buso's three masters. Agreement seemed inevitable, yet Namgung remained silent. Seeing him deep in thought, the others assumed he was carefully weighing the proposal rather than immediately rejecting it. Within Namgung's thoughts, conflict stirred. As the Heaven's Master, the idea of destroying the alliance was something he welcomed, yet even with Yeon Buso's arm severed, proposing such an extreme decision felt out of character for the alliance leader. Yi-mok had risen to his position despite not belonging to the 9 great sects or the 5 great clans, precisely because he was known as a centrist and righteous man. Namgung reasoned that the demonic cult, the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect, and the remaining unorthodox forces would all inevitably gather at the Dano festival. The spread of medical knowledge had already succeeded thanks to the book left behind by the Earthmaster, and with the alliance's backing, this could become the perfect opportunity to eliminate the upper ranks of the unorthodox sects altogether. Breaking his silence, Namgung asked Yi-mok to explain the reason behind such a grave proposal. Yi-mok answered that the alliance with the demonic cult had been formed to uproot dangerous evil. However, he admitted that this judgment had been flawed. Cooperating with one evil to erase another ran counter to the principles of the orthodox path. As the center of orthodoxy, the Morim Alliance had a duty to correct this mistake. Inside, Namgung smiled. His doubts dissolved instantly. What had seemed like a sudden and reckless proposal now appeared justified. With the 2 general strategists and several masters absent, this moment presented a rare opportunity. Striking his fist into his palm, Namgung declared his understanding, stating that he had been moved by Yi-mok's commitment to justice. He openly agreed with the proposal, emphasizing that he had opposed the alliance from the very beginning. A weary sigh escaped the second leader. This reaction from Namgung had been entirely expected. Quiet exchanges followed among the elders, recognizing that this would not be easily resolved and that they needed to prevent matters from escalating further. The sixth leader, sensing that the situation was slipping out of control, spoke up. He reminded everyone that decisions of this magnitude required a fair meeting and could not proceed unless more than half of the leaders were present. If such a proposal was to be made, all leaders should be summoned. Namgung immediately countered by proposing a faster method, invoking the Alliance Leader Mandate. The Alliance Leader Mandate was an exceptional authority within the Morim Alliance. Though the alliance consisted of countless sects and clans that normally governed through collective meetings, this mandate granted the alliance leader 3 opportunities to issue absolute decisions that all members were required to obey without dispute. Pong Chung-won shouted in alarm, reminding Namgung that former alliance leaders had only ever hesitated to use the mandate except in the most extreme circumstances. He questioned how Namgung could suggest its use in such a critical matter. Yi-mok responded decisively. He agreed with the third master's opinion and declared that the nullification of the alliance would be announced through the alliance leader mandate. Shock rippled through the hall. Guk-yeon cried out in disbelief, while Pong Chung-won demanded how such a decision could be made so abruptly. Deep within, Namgung felt a surge of satisfaction. Yi-mok had not been exaggerating when he brought this forward. Every lingering concern vanished in that instant. At last, an opportunity had emerged for Namgung to act fully in line with the extremist faction's ideals, and he was certain that someone important would be greatly pleased by this turn of events. Late at night, inside the Morim Alliance's office, a single candle set in a white porcelain lamp cast faint light across the darkened room. Yi-mok Mok unfolded a crumpled sheet of paper and read its contents in silence. The letter identified its author as Chun Yo-won, Lord of the Demonic Cult. It opened with an apology for injuring Yi Mok's son and the other leaders inside the Imperial Palace, explaining that refraining from doing so would have invited suspicion. It stated that the Alliance Leader mandate needed to be enacted and promised that once it was announced, Yan Buso and the 2 other captives would be released safely. In return, Yo-won would request that the Emperor reconsider Taoism in matters of diplomacy, while asking Yi Mok to fulfill a single condition. The letter explained that due to the chaos in the Imperial Palace, the succession plan might have collapsed and the leaders of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect might not appear at the festival. It also acknowledged that Yi Mok's faction, like Yo-won's own, was suffering from the presence of spies. Because of that shared vulnerability, this plan had been devised, and for it to succeed, the great leader would need to act accordingly. Inside his thoughts, Yi Mok reflected that although he had been furious over what the demonic cult leader had done, he had never intended to respond rashly. From that perspective, deceiving even his own allies to mislead the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect and proposing the nullification of the alliance now made sense. Still, despite choosing to trust Yo-won for the moment, he recognized it as a calculated gamble. After rereading the letter, Yi Mok held it over the candle flame and burned it to ash. At the same time, deep within a secluded valley at Yongjabong Peak, located southwest of the Murim Alliance's main base, lay shrouded in darkness. Before its entrance, an unidentified man with long black hair and a bamboo hat appeared and knelt. Facing the empty cave, he announced that the 3rd squad of the Chi Blade sect had completed his assigned mission. A presence stirred within the cave and asked how it had gone. The man replied that it had been a success. When questioned further, he confirmed that the nullification of the alliance had indeed been announced. At that, the man removed his bamboo hat. Beneath it, he revealed himself to be Peng Yo-suk of the Peng family. He praised the mask that had been prepared for the operation, remarking on how flawless it was, and tugged at the skin-like surface. The masked figure inside the cave immediately warned him to stop, explaining that it had been made from a corpse and would tear if pulled too much. Peng Yo-suk apologized at once. The masked figure then asked whether the Blue Heaven Society had begun to move. Peng Yo-suk reported that Namgung Gyeong had acted exactly as expected, and that identifying the true master of the Blue Heaven Society would likely happen soon. The masked man ordered him to continue observing them until the plan began. At once, Peng Yo-suk replaced his bamboo hat and departed at blinding speed. Watching the direction he vanished, the masked figure muttered quietly. He declared that he had concealed his identity all this time because Chun Yo-won had interfered with his affairs, and vowed that this time the Lord of the Demonic Cult would pay the price. 2 days later, the Murim Alliance's announcement spread throughout Yulin. Everyone understood that the alliance had never been meant to last long, yet its collapse had come far sooner than expected. Even the unorthodox alliance, largely unaware of outside developments due to its own internal turmoil, was drawn into paying attention. In the northwest of Sichuan, at the headquarters of the unorthodox alliance, Gal Mojum, leader of the 18 Riverways, delivered his report to Hang Yen, the unorthodox alliance leader known as the Proud West King. Gal Mojum explained that the alliance had been dissolved earlier than anticipated, noting that it had not even endured a full year. He emphasized the need to closely observe how events unfolded, despite their relative isolation from the broader Jianghu caused by internal conflicts, and then concluded his report. Hang Yen reacted with laughter, remarking that developments had become unexpectedly interesting. He reflected that the Dano festival alone could have provided a major opportunity, yet because of one troublesome individual, that chance had slipped away. Gal Mojum responded by stating that Hang Yen could eliminate that man whenever he wished, once his internal injuries had fully healed. Hang Yen did not answer immediately. He was still undergoing treatment for the injuries he had sustained in his battle against Chun Yuzhong, the former leader of the demonic cult. Gal Mojum called out to him again. Hang Yen then replied calmly that such changes were not strange. He observed that it was only natural for the younger generation to replace the old, and admitted that he had held his position for a long time already. Gal Mojum protested fiercely, urging him not to speak in such terms. He reminded Hang Yen that he was the great leader of the Unorthodox Alliance and the Proud West King, with tens of thousands of followers awaiting his return. He insisted that Hang Yen recover quickly and eradicate that man, warning him him not to voice such weakness before his subordinates. Hang Yen laughed again, commenting that Gal Mojum certainly enjoyed lecturing him. Gal Mojum replied that Hang Yen was being too harsh, pointing out that he personally contributed a third of the Alliance's funds. Amused, Hang Yen acknowledged the point and remarked that, now that he thought about it, it might be necessary to demonstrate to the Jiang Hu that he was still very much alive and powerful. Gal Mojum questioned what he meant by that. Hang Yen clarified that he was referring to the non-aggression treaty in Tonghe County. Gal Mojum protested anxiously, urging that with the war still ongoing, Hang Yen should focus solely on recovering his injuries. Hang Yen refused. He reasoned that if he remained inactive during the Dano festival, that man would immediately realize something was wrong. Failing to send a representative to the signing of the non-aggression treaty would only invite rebellion. Since he had never personally attended any of the previous pact signings, he concluded that sending a substitute again would raise no suspicion. He therefore ordered Gal Mojum to attend in his stead. The command caught Gal Mojum off guard. Hang Yen dismissed his concern, stating that it did not matter. The Great Deathly Saint and the Bright Conquest Sword were still present to hold the line. He then reminded Gal Mojum that he was not being sent without purpose. It had been the demonic cult who had killed their nephews, the Yellow River Demon Trio. Gal Mojum acknowledged the debt that remained unpaid. Hang Yen declared that this mission was Gal Mojum's chance to settle it. After the signing, he was to determine which faction the Orthodox side or the Saber sect truly targeted. He also mentioned that the son of Chun Yuzhong had been unusually active lately and instructed Gal Mojum to teach him that martial arts alone did not define power. He then asked what title the Orthodox had given the current demonic cult leader. Gal Mojum answered that the title was dramatic, born from the incident in which the demonic cult leader severed the arms of Murim Alliance executives for opposing the Alliance. Because of that act, he had been named the heaven-defying Demon Emperor. Hang Yen scoffed at the title. Despite being one of the 5 great martial artists, he himself was called only a king. He labeled the title arrogant and ordered Gal Mojum to ensure that the demonic cult leader would never use it again. Gal Mojum accepted the order without hesitation, vowing to carry it out and destroy the demonic cult. After Gal Mojum departed, Hang Yen gazed down at his scarred chest, tracing the wounds left behind by Chun Yuzhong, the former lord of the demonic cult. No matter how much time passed, he could not forget how he had been forced to retreat before that man. Deep within, he swore that the humiliation he had suffered would be repaid with the life of Chun Yuzhong's child. 4 days before the signing of the non-aggression treaty, envoys from the Imperial Palace arrived at the main hall of the Murim Alliance. The messenger sent to deliver the decree was Yongzhou, the northern commander. Yongzhou unfurled the scroll and announced that the non-aggression treaty between the Empire and the Jianghu would be signed during the Dano festival at the fortress of Tonghe County. Since the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult, the Unorthodox Alliance, and the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts Sect were all entering into a peace agreement with the Great Ming Empire, no more than 100 soldiers from each organization would be permitted to attend, and strict conditions would be enforced throughout the process. Within Namgung's thoughts, a smile formed. The restriction immediately revealed whose idea it had been. To him, resistance was pointless. The alliance with the demonic cult had already been broken, and now the demonic cult leader would be standing in the heart of Orthodox territory. 5 squads were already on standby, encircling the area. No matter what the demonic cult leader attempted with the Emperor, escape from Tonghe County would be impossible. Even if he sensed the trap, there would be no path left open. Namgung reflected on the timing with grim satisfaction. Before the Alliance annulment was announced, Murim Alliance martial artists had been stationed near the Yellow River. As planned, the Unorthodox Alliance of Sichuan and the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts Sect had begun moving inward, sealing off the demonic cult's northern routes. Only around 50 demonic cult members remained in the palace. He concluded that this was the demonic cult leader's fatal mistake. He had already completed the procedure for the supreme martial physique using the secret text of the divine physician. To Namgung, the title Heaven-Defying Demon Emperor was nothing more than delusion. In his belief, evil could never triumph over the heavens. For the sake of the Jianghu, Tonghe County would become the demonic cult leader's grave. Time passed swiftly, and the long-awaited festival finally arrived. Dano, the great auspicious day of the 5th lunar month, was believed to be the time when Yang energy reached its peak. The Dano festival had originated during the reign of King Hui of the Chu dynasty and had since spread far and wide. Jin Castle stood at the heart of Tonga, the first capital where Chu Wonmyong, the founding emperor, had once resided. It was the very place where he had sworn an oath before the heavens and earth to protect his people. In remembrance of that vow, Tonki was chosen as the site where the non-aggression treaty between the imperial family and the people of Yulin would be held. Before noon, when the treaty ceremony was set to begin, officials from the imperial palace stood in formation alongside 200 guards and 3,000 soldiers, arranged neatly in 5 rows. The palace guards stationed at the castle gates beat their drums in unison, their voices ringing out as they announced the arrival of the Orthodox Murim Alliance's leader and the heads of each faction. Yi Mok was the first to pass through the gates of Jin Castle. He inhaled deeply as his eyes swept across the fortress and the ceremonial decorations prepared for the occasion. Inside, he acknowledged that the moment had finally come. From that day onward, the flow of the Jianghu would change. Under the guidance of imperial guards, the leaders of the Yulin clans entered next, moving to the side opposite the imperial palace guards. Those assigned positions near the western gate quickly formed ranks. Among them were elite warriors whose restrained auras were still impossible to conceal, the White Ring Squad. Watching them, Namgung felt satisfaction bloom within. He believed it had been the correct decision to deploy the White Ring Squad instead of the Justice Squad. With Yan Buso as their captain, their presence carried weight. To him, the demonic cult leader excelled at creating enemies even more than dominating in martial prowess. The tension radiating from the White Ring Squad members, including the visibly enraged Vice Squad leader, only reinforced that belief. Namgung recalled reports that Yan Buzo had forced 300 embroidered uniform guards and eunuchs to kneel using nothing but true energy. He wondered whether the same feat could be repeated here, against such a gathering. He was confident that the Unorthodox Alliance and the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect would also bring their finest experts. In his mind, the true battle would begin the instant the treaty ritual concluded, and the most crucial moment would come after eliminating the demonic cult leader and his followers. From the western gate of Jin Castle, the thunder of drums echoed once more, announcing the arrival of the Unorthodox Alliance and their sect leaders. Peng Chungwon's gaze sharpened. He had heard rumors of internal conflict within the Unorthodox Alliance, yet they had still chosen to attend. Even within Yulin, spies were embedded across every faction. A middle-aged man wearing a black eye patch stepped through the gate. It was Gal Mojum of the Yellow River. Shock rippled through the Orthodox Murim Alliance as his identity was recognized. Many could not believe he was present. Yi Mok quietly observed the procession. Hang Yen was once again absent, and the figures accompanying Gal Mojum appeared to be leaders of the 18 Riverways, though one was conspicuously missing. As Gal Mojum entered the castle grounds, his eyes immediately searched for the demonic cult. Though he had never encountered them directly, he knew of them through interrogation and hypnosis. He recalled the testimony of a man who had spoken of Yang Danhwa, leader of the Henan Eastern branch, and a young man with an unusually pale face who seemed to hail from the 10,000 Great Mountains. From the respect Yang Danhwa had shown, Gal Mojum had concluded that the youth held high status within the demonic cult. Deep within, Gal Mojum resolved that regardless of who truly stood behind it all, Yang Danhwa had to be found. Once he was, Gal Mojum intended to exact revenge by slaughtering those the demonic cult held dear, slowly and in full view. As Gal Mojum, the 18 river families, and the hundreds of warriors beneath them prepared to take formation under the guidance of the Imperial Guards, the heavy rhythm of drums suddenly thundered from the east. A ripple of anticipation spread instantly. Both the Orthodox and Unorthodox alliances turned their gazes toward the eastern gate at the same time. The announcement echoed across the grounds, declaring the arrival of the 3 leaders of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. The reaction was immediate. Many in Yulin had assumed that all 6 sect leaders would appear, commanding numerous clans. Instead, only 3 had come, yet that very fact carried far greater weight than a full procession ever could. Within Yi Mok's thoughts, unease surfaced. Since Jiangsu had been taken from their grasp, this was the first direct confrontation. He sensed that they too intended to exploit this situation to seize dominance over Zhongyuan. All attention converged on the advancing figures. To the left stood No Dokyung, leader of the Blade Sect. To the right was Jia Wukang, leader of the Berserk Blade Sect. Between them walked Li Wook, the Qi Blade Sect leader, his long hair flowing freely, his eyes concealed beneath a strip of black cloth. Peng Chong-won quietly assessed them, remarking on the oppressive strength they radiated. Yi Mok responded with grave certainty. He stated that everyone within the alliance might have to fight with their lives on the line that day. All three leaders had reached the mystic realm, and each possessed skill great enough to rival him directly. Deep within Peng Chong-won, disbelief surged. He had already known they surpassed him, having failed to discern their martial realms, but learning that all three had reached the mystic realm shook him. Sweat formed along Yi Mok's brow as his focus fixed on the blindfolded man. He recognized that Lee Wook had reached the very peak of the mystic realm, just as he himself had. That level alone qualified him to be counted among the 5 great martial artists. Fear also gripped Namgung. Inside, he calculated rapidly. The 12 warriors following the 3 leaders had all reached the evolutionary realm, and the 100 behind them were at supreme peak or higher. His original plan, to eliminate the demonic cult leader first, was no longer viable. Now he needed to force these monsters to clash with one another instead. If the alliance failed to fight with everything they had, annihilation was inevitable. Meanwhile, Jia Wukeng openly reveled in the shock reflected on the faces before him, amused by their reaction. No Dokyeong dismissed them coldly, seeing no reason to acknowledge those he believed were already dead. Wukeng continued his taunting, mocking their expressions and ridiculing Dokyeong's age. Inside Dokyeong, irritation flared. Among the 6 martial leaders, he alone had held the title of Swordmaster for the longest time. Master Yi Gam then confirmed that everything beneath the grounds had already been prepared. At a single signal, no one present would escape alive. Dokyeong questioned whether such measures were truly necessary, expressing confidence in the 7-star ultimate blade array. In his view, eliminating the demonic cult leader alone would suffice, making the use of the Rage Strike Thunderclap unnecessary. The Rage Strike Thunderclap was a catastrophic explosive, 5 times more powerful than the original Strike Thunderclap developed a century earlier by the famed explosive specialist No Kyukja. Lee Wook responded with cold logic. Preparing for the worst was simply prudent. If they eradicated everyone gathered there, they would move one decisive step closer to their ultimate objective. Dokyeong acknowledged this, then observed Lee Wook more closely. He sensed that Lee Wook's temperament had grown far colder, likely driven by fury over his brother's death. Though Dokyeong himself was acting under orders, he knew one truth with certainty. Anyone Lee Wook decided to kill would never leave this place alive. The thunder of drums erupted once more. From the southern gate of the castle, the Imperial Guards shouted in unison, announcing the arrival of the Lord of the Demonic Cult. At that declaration, a surge of tension swept through the grounds. All 3 factions gathered within the castle turned their attention toward the southern gate at once. The demonic cult, the single faction all sides had been targeting, had finally appeared. Within silent coordination, orders were exchanged. The moment the Lord of the demonic cult set foot inside the castle, the war was to begin. Master Yi Gam acknowledged Lee Wook's telepathic command without hesitation. Within Lee Wook's thoughts, contempt burned fiercely. The treaty ritual meant nothing to him. With the most important figures of all 3 forces gathered in one place, he intended to wipe them all out and leave nothing behind, not even bones. Heavy footsteps echoed from the gate. Several members of the demonic cult entered, carrying 4 to 5 large wooden boxes and bringing them into the castle grounds. Confusion rippled through the crowd as people whispered among themselves, questioning what the cult had brought. The shape and size of the boxes drew uneasy speculation, with some likening them to coffins. When the boxes reached the center of the grounds, the demonic cult members stopped. At their head stood Ko Wang-hul, leader of Yowun's 6 swords. His gaze swept across the gathering as though searching for someone in particular. Jia Wukeng tightened his grip on his blade, wondering what Wang-hul was looking for. Without warning, Wang-hul kicked one of the wooden boxes. The container toppled over with a loud crash, its lid breaking open as metal clanged against stone. Something heavy rolled out and landed on the ground with a deep, resonant thud. The object resembled a massive iron sphere. Most people stared in confusion, having never seen such a thing before. Yet among the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect, faces stiffened instantly. Disbelief flashed through them as they recognized what lay before their eyes. Wang-hul dropped to one knee, his gaze fixed on a man standing among the imperial officials at the center of the formation. Raising his voice, he apologized for the delay, explaining that there had been many enemies, and that they had dismantled and eliminated every every last one of them before arriving, addressing the man directly as the Demon Lord. Shock rippled outward, eyes snapped toward the palace official Wang Hul had spoken to, disbelief etched across every face. Murmurs spread rapidly as people questioned what they were seeing. That man did not resemble the image that had circulated throughout Yuli. Across the Jianghu, the lord of the demonic cult had been known as the heaven-defying demon emperor. His appearance passed from mouth to mouth among the faction. Disbelief surged within Yi Mok. The man standing there looked utterly ordinary, nothing like the fearsome image associated with the demonic cult leader. To him, it felt as though they were being openly mocked. The middle-aged man calmly asked whether they wished to inspect the items. The Western Depot emissary reacted in alarm, questioning how such a vast number of explosives could have been concealed within Jin Castle. Yongzhou, the northern commander, shouted in shock, pointing out that the bombs were far larger than those stored in the Imperial Palace armory, and demanding to know how such weapons could exist there at all. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd as realization spread. People whispered in disbelief that all of the boxes contained bombs, estimating that there had to be at least 500. Many had believed that only the government controlled explosives, and panic rose as they insisted that His Imperial Majesty be informed at once. As several officials on the podium moved toward the bombs scattered across the ground, 2 iron spheres suddenly lifted into the air. They were drawn effortlessly into the hands of the middle-aged man. It was Chun Yo-won, disguised beneath the skin mask of a palace official. Within Li Wook, clarity struck. He recognized it as telekinesis and immediately understood that this man was the true demonic cult leader, someone possessing an overwhelming reserve of chi. Yet something felt deeply wrong. It was already well past noon, and the prince was nowhere to be seen. He questioned whether the Empire had ever intended to sign the pact in the first place. Frustration burned inside him as he accused this entire situation of being Chun Yo-won's scheme. Namgung also watched closely, unsettled by what he saw. He could not sense any aura from the man at all, which only deepened his unease. Yo-won handed the 2 bombs to the northern commander and the Western Depot emissary. He reminded them that he had warned such an act would occur and instructed them to immediately report the situation to His Majesty. Yongzhou acknowledged the order at once, admitting that disaster would have followed had this not been discovered in time. He vowed to ensure the report reached the emperor without delay. In a blur of motion, the 2 officials sprinted toward the northern gate, shouting that they would leave the rest to be handled there. At that sight, irritation flared within Jia Wukang as he drew his blade. Yi Mok demanded to know what he was doing. Wukang clicked his tongue in frustration, admitting that their plan had been ruined from the very beginning. He revealed that he had already begun circulating his chi. With that, Wukang launched himself forward, charging after the 2 officials racing toward the Emperor. If they escaped the castle and reported the matter to the Imperial Palace, the Berserk Saber faction would not only make enemies of Yulin, but of the Empire itself. At that, Li Wook shouted and gave the signal to seal the gates. 12 of his subordinates immediately raised the horn in his hand and blew with full force. As though they had been waiting for that sound, warriors stationed near each gate slashed through the thick ropes that held the massive wooden gates in place. The ropes snapped cleanly, and the gates that were meant to remain open began to descend at once with a thunderous crash. Confusion erupted across the grounds. The people of Yulin and the Morim Alliance stared in disbelief as the southern, eastern, and western gates closed simultaneously. Panic spread as realization dawned that control of the gates had been seized. Only the northern gate remained open. Those near it fled without hesitation, pouring through the opening as fast as their legs could carry them. Jia Wukang pursued them with manic ferocity. Yongzhou urged the others to keep running and not look back, directing them straight toward the northern gate. Behind them, Wukang closed the distance with terrifying speed, his delight unmistakable as he realized they were within reach. He mocked their escape, convinced there was no meaning in running. Yongzhou was struck with disbelief at how quickly Wukang had caught up. Crimson energy erupted as Wukang brought his sword down in a vicious arc, intent on cutting them apart. At that instant, a blur flashed into existence before him. His blade was intercepted mid-swing. The one who blocked it was Markham, the Dark King, the notorious great guardian of the demonic cult. Wukang recognized him immediately and erupted in fury, ordering him to stay out of the way. He launched another attack without pause, but Markham slipped past each strike with fluid, unpredictable movements. In a sudden counter, Markham drove his blade toward Wukang's neck. Wukang recoiled in shock and leaned back just enough to avoid the fatal strike by the narrowest margin. With a sharp breath, he twisted his body aside and swung his massive sword in a sweeping counterattack. The blades collided. Despite the overwhelming power behind Wukang's strike, Markham held his ground and blocked it cleanly. Wukang laughed in admiration, acknowledging Markham as worthy of his reputation as the demonic cult's head guardian. Deep within, he judged that this fight would not end quickly. He knew he would eventually prevail, but frustration surged as he realized he was being delayed while his targets escaped. By then, the two officials had already crossed through the northern gate. Seeing Wukang restrained, Li Wook noticed too late that the northern gate had remained open. A sharp sense of urgency struck him as he realized they were about to lose their quarry. When Li Wook raised his hands, 3 swords materialized in the air. He waved his hand, directing the blades toward the northern gate. The 3 swords shot forward like arrows, slicing through the air at tremendous speed. Yet halfway to their target, they abruptly halted, as though they had collided with an invisible wall. Li Wook froze in shock, unable to speak. No Dokyung, the fire sword master, was equally stunned as he realized that control over the air swords had been forcibly seized. The implication alone defied common sense. Taking control of another's air sword technique was something that should not have been possible. In response, Li Wook's gaze shifted toward the podium, where Chun Yo-won calmly removed his skin mask and outer robe. His arm remained extended toward the immobilized swords as he revealed himself. Yimak watched in disbelief, his thoughts spiraling as he realized that Yo-won had overridden Li Wook's chi sword control itself, an act that should have been impossible. Gal Mojem felt terror crawl through him as he sensed the truth. To him, this could only mean one thing. Such authority over chi belonged to the life and death realm. Yo-won casually waved his hand, letting him have them back as he released his control. The suspended swords instantly reversed direction, snapping back toward their original master with lethal intent. Shock flashed across Li Wook's face as he reacted on instinct. He drew his sword and intercepted the returning air swords in rapid succession. By then, the two officials had already escaped through the northern gate. They were completely gone from sight. Frustration surged through Li Wook as he realized that his plan had unraveled from the very beginning. His air swords had been seized, turned against him, and the targets had escaped. Within his thoughts, clarity settled in grimly. Yo-won was not someone who would fall easily. Pung Chung-won observed the scene with growing unease. Although Yo-won's appearance remained unchanged from the last time they had met, the presence surrounding him was entirely different. In such a short span of time, not only had his strength advanced, but the air around him carried the unmistakable weight of authority. He no longer felt like a lone martial artist. He felt like a ruler, the head of a powerful organization. The members of Yulin were shaken by what they had witnessed. Yet among them, Gal Mojem experienced a different kind of shock. As he stared at the lord of the demonic cult for the first time, he realized that the intelligence he had received after the Yellow River incident had been accurate in every detail. The man before him matched the description perfectly. Inside Gal Mojem, certainty finally settled the moment he saw the man's face. He was convinced now that it had been the demonic cult leader who had slit the throats of his nephews, the Yellow River 3 demons, and seized the Dragon Tiger Claw. Rage surged within him, driving an urge to tear Yo-won apart on the spot. Yet he restrained himself, realizing that he would need the combined strength of everyone present to stand even a chance against such an opponent. From the tension around him, it was clear he was not the only one thinking the same way. Namgung was also calculating rapidly. The explosives alone were 3 times larger than anything the Murim Alliance possessed. To plant that many beneath their feet meant the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect had been prepared to annihilate everyone present. They were far more dangerous than anticipated and clearly beyond anyone's control. Namgung judged that not even the Alliance head could win in a direct confrontation with the demonic cult leader, and the expression on Yimok's face confirmed it. With enemies closing in from both sides, Namgung found himself cornered, uncertain which threat he should confront first. At that moment, a telepathic message reached him, addressing him directly by his true title as the Heaven's Master of the Blue Heaven Society. The sender was Li Wook of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. Namgung stiffened at the sudden contact. Though startled, he was fully aware that his identity had been exposed. Doubt surfaced as he glanced behind him, briefly suspecting spies within his own ranks. Almost immediately, Yin Master Tang Pil-soon sent him a telepathic inquiry, asking whether Namgung had something to say. Namgung dismissed it calmly, claiming it was nothing and telling the Yin Master not to concern himself. Only then did he realize that he had not initiated any contact himself, confirming that the message had indeed been meant for him alone. Li Wook continued through telepathy, stating plainly that the demonic cult posed a far greater threat to the Orthodox Alliance than his own faction ever had. He declared that the demonic cult leader leader was no longer human, but emphasized that Yowon was currently alone. Namgung reacted with alarm, sensing where the conversation was heading. Lee Wook confirmed it without hesitation. He stated that this was their chance to kill an expert who had reached the life and death realm. Even someone at that level would struggle against dozens of martial artists from the evolutionary and mystic realms attacking at once. He acknowledged that Namgung possessed a hidden trump card of his own, and estimated that they might lose 80% of their forces, but judged it an acceptable sacrifice. Lee Wook assured him that the Berserk Saber sect would lead the assault and directly asked whether Namgung would fight alongside them. Namgung fell into deep contemplation. It became clear to him that Lee Wook was aware of the supreme martial physique, which meant a spy had already infiltrated the Blue Heaven Society. The fact that even the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect was proposing cooperation made one thing undeniable: the demonic cult leader's strength had surpassed all expectations. Namgung concluded that Lee Wook was right. This was their only opportunity to kill Yowon. Lee Wook then added that he had already reached an agreement with Gal Mojam, the supreme leader of the Yellow River faction. Namgung was shaken by that revelation. Even the unorthodox alliance had been drawn in, and far faster than he had anticipated. Accepting the situation, Namgung agreed, stating that the cooperation would last only for the duration of the battle against the demonic cult leader. Lee Wook pressed him further, telling him there was no time left and that Namgung himself would have to persuade the Murm Alliance head. Namgung agreed again. Deep within, he was confident that Yi Mok would accept the plan. After all, Yi Mok had already been furious enough to break the alliance, and in Namgung's mind, there was no possibility that he would refuse such a chance to strike back. At that moment, Gal Mojam raised his voice and rallied his forces. He declared that their enemy stood before them, Chun Yowon, the lord of the demonic cult, the one responsible for destroying the 18 river families in Yongho. He proclaimed that this night would be used to console the souls of their fallen comrades with Yowon's blood and urged everyone to follow him. Lee Wook also shouted, calling upon the descendants of the Berserk Saber God. He proclaimed that the demonic cult leader had to be eliminated for the sake of their grand cause, and commanded his followers to advance without fear. The warriors of both factions roared together, their shouts echoing across the grounds as they surged with killing intent. Seeing this, Namgung hurriedly sent a telepathic message to the Murm Alliance head. He attempted to argue that this was the perfect opportunity and that they needed to strike down the lord of the demonic cult at once. But his thoughts were abruptly cut short. Before Namgung could finish, Yi Mok stepped onto the podium and came to a halt beside Yowon. Namgung had been convinced that Yi Mok could never face Yowon directly and had been too focused on forming countermeasures to notice the movement. When he finally realized what was happening, disbelief flooded his mind. He questioned what Yi Mok was doing. Then another figure ascended the podium. It was Peng Chong-won, the 6th leader, who walked up and took his place beside the alliance head. Moments later, Namgung heard a voice urging action. His eyes widened when he recognized the 7th leader, Mo Yong Kang. One after another, the remaining leaders who had come for the treaty slowly climbed onto the podium as well. Lee Wook was equally confused, unable to grasp what was unfolding. Soon, around 140 leaders of smaller Yulin factions joined them, standing together atop the podium. When everything was in place, Yowon and Yi Mok exchanged a brief nod. The sight left Namgung frozen. He struggled to comprehend what he had just seen, questioning whether the two had truly acknowledged each other. Driven by shock and confusion, Namgung shouted at the alliance head, demanding to know what he was doing and accusing him of siding with the demonic cult. Yi Mok answered with fury, turning the accusation back on Namgung. He demanded to know why Namgung was attempting to side with their enemies instead. Namgung's eyes widened completely, being pointed out in front of everyone. Accused of aligning with the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect, left him momentarily speechless, unable to form a response. Earlier, deep within the forest near Kaifeng, two figures met as planned. It was Yi Mok and Chun Yowon. Yi Mok acknowledged that he had arrived late. Yowon noted that their meeting had finally come to pass. Yi Mok immediately pressed for clarity, asking what Yowon had truly meant in the letter. Yowon explained that the letter meant exactly what it stated. He remarked that Yi Mok should have already sensed something was amiss, though he understood if he had not. He described an extreme ideology, one that sought to purify the world by eradicating evil. On the surface, it appeared harmless to the Murm Alliance, which was precisely why it had been able to expand unchecked. That organization was known as the Blue Heaven Society. Those words made Yi Mok's eyes tremble. Yowon continued, revealing that many within the alliance were already following the society's commands, and worse, those orders now took priority authority over Yimok's authority. Yimok reacted with disbelief. Yowon then handed him a booklet. It contained the names of the Blue Heaven Society's known members and their internal hierarchy. He admitted that the identities of the leader and several upper ranks remained uncertain. As Yimok scanned the list, one name struck him like a blade: Heaven Master Namgung. Yowon asked whether that name clarified anything. Yimok remembered how Namgung had been the one to push for the use of the Alliance leader mandate to break ties with the demonic cult. Yimok then questioned Yowon's true objective, stating that he did not believe this information was shared out of goodwill. He asked whether Yowon believed the Blue Heaven Society intended to destroy the Miram Alliance. Yowon stated plainly that the society planned to cooperate with the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect to attack during the Dano festival. Yowon warned that it would become a massacre, one that would not end with the deaths of Yimok and the Masters alone. It would drag the entire Orthodox Miram Alliance into ruin. However, he emphasized that it was not too late. Their meeting existed for that very reason, to prevent such an outcome. Though they had long been enemies, the collapse of the Miram Alliance would also harm the demonic cult. Jongyuan needed the alliance to remain standing. Suspicion sharpened Yimok's gaze. Yowon admitted that belief was difficult, and said he had not expected trust to come easily. That was why he had a proposal. Yimok hesitantly acknowledged it. Yowon explained that reversing the enemy's plans required vigilance. When the moment arrived, Yimok needed to observe carefully. Soon, Namgung would deliver a message from the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. In the present, Yimok reflected deep within that he had desperately wished that moment would never arrive, yet Yowon had been right. Back at the ceremony, Lee Wook shouted in outrage, demanding to know the meaning of Yimok standing beside the demonic cult leader after declaring the alliance broken. Yimok fired back, accusing Lee Wook of planting explosives beneath the grounds. He recalled the letters that had pressured him into dissolving the alliance and revealed that he had uncovered the tampering caused by planted spies. Yimok pointed out a small but fatal mistake. After decades of hostility with the demonic cult, he had learned one crucial detail. They never referred to themselves as the demonic cult, but as the heavenly demon divine cult. Realization struck Lee Wook. In that instant, he understood his error. He had been exposed by a single choice of words. Yimok drew his sword and declared his intent to eradicate the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect for attempting to sabotage the alliance and threatening the great Ming Empire. In response, the factions of the Miram Alliance raised their voices as one, proclaiming that they would never side with traitors and affirming their loyalty to the alliance head. Inside Namgung, frustration boiled over. He had never imagined the situation would fracture this far. A telepathic message reached him from Tang Pil-soon, who stood nearby, asking what they were supposed to do now and warning that their morale had already collapsed. Deep within, Namgung knew there was no retreat left for him. Even if he were branded a traitor and countless sacrifices were required, he had to kill the demonic cult leader here and now. He unsheathed his sword and shouted for his followers not to waver. He claimed they still held the advantage and declared this their only chance to bring down the evil demonic cult leader. He called for them to follow him in the name of the Blue Heaven. Those aligned with him roared back, pledging to bring down the demonic cult and create a world ruled by the Blue Heaven. At heart, Yimok felt sorrow at how events had unfolded. He recognized Namgung's choice and resolved that he could not allow that organization to continue existing. It had to be destroyed here. Another worry struck him when he saw Sung Baek, the White Ring squad leader, standing on Namgung's side. Yimok sent a telepathic message to him, demanding to know why he was still there and ordering him to return with his soldiers. Sung Baek replied that Yimok was siding with the demonic cult leader, who had taken their squad leader hostage. He apologized, but stated that the White Ring squad would no longer follow Yimok's commands. They had chosen to bring down the demonic cult leader instead and wished Yimok safety. Yimok found himself unable to respond. Inside, frustration surged as he realized that even the White Ring squad had turned against him. He then addressed Chun Yo-won, admitting that the situation no longer favored them and asking whether Yo-won had a plan. Yo-won snapped his fingers. A thunderous roar erupted from the north, drawing every gaze within the castle. Shock spread as people realized that the northern gate, the only one still open, had now been sealed shut. Panic rippled through the crowd as voices rose, questioning what they were supposed to do and accusing Yo-won of blocking their only escape route. Peng Chung-won, the sixth leader, looked toward Yo-won in confusion. Lee Wook burst into laughter, mocking Yowon for sealing off his own path of retreat and claiming gratitude for Yowon doing his work for him. Yowon merely smiled and replied that there was no need for thanks. He had simply ensured that no one would be able to run away. Lee Wook stared at him in confusion, unable to grasp what Yowon meant. Then, without warning, he fell silent as he sensed an unfamiliar surge of energy. Then it happened. The sound of footsteps echoed as people stepped onto the outer wall of Jin Castle. The number of figures was vast. One by one, they appeared above the battlements. Shock spread instantly as people realized who they were. Every single one of them was a warrior who had reached at least the Master Realm. At that moment, Wang Hul raised his voice as though he had been waiting for this exact timing. He mocked their delay, remarking that for those operating directly under the palace guardians, arriving this late made little sense. A sarcastic retort followed immediately, questioning whether there was any reason for them to stay by the Lord's side at all. In the next instant, 5 young men and women leapt down from the castle wall in swift succession. After landing, they moved directly toward the podium, knelt before Yowon, and bowed in unison. They were the 6 swords, Yowon's personal warriors and the leaders of the demonic cult's forces. Once the 6 swords finished their greeting, a thunderous sound followed. More than 500 warriors, all at the Master Realm, knelt on one knee along the castle wall. Their unified shout echoed violently through the fortress as they formally greeted their lord. Yet the spectacle did not end there. A strange surge of energy rippled through the grounds. Those sensitive to chi felt it instantly. Swordmaster Lee Wook, unlike the others, turned his gaze toward the eastern gate, sensing something profoundly different. In the next moment, a massive middle-aged man descended slowly from the eastern wall, stepping through the air itself. 2 enormous swords were crossed on his back, and every step he took carried overwhelming pressure. Those unfamiliar with his face might not have recognized him, but among the Yellow River factions, terror spread instantly. This was the man who had slaughtered 3,000 warriors alone, and reduced the 30 riverways into the 18 riverways. The unrivaled sword, Junwang. Shock seized Gal Mojam. His body stiffened as memories surged within him. Junwang was the very reason his left eye was gone, hidden now beneath a black patch. Lee Wook was equally shaken. One of the 5 great martial artists was standing here, before them all, aligned with the demonic cult. Junwang descended fully and knelt on one knee before Yowon. With absolute loyalty, he announced that he had arrived as swiftly as possible upon receiving his lord's command. Immediately after, an even more horrifying revelation unfolded. The 200 palace guards stationed around the podium, along with the 3,000 regular soldiers of the Imperial Palace, all dropped to one knee at the same time, their heads lowered toward Yowon in perfect unison. A chilling realization spread through the crowd. These were not Imperial troops at all. The reason the guards and soldiers had not reacted when the eunuchs and the northern commander fled was finally clear. Every one of them was a demonic cult member, perfectly disguised in embroidered guard uniforms. No one had anticipated this. No one could have imagined that such an overwhelming number of cultists had already infiltrated the palace and replaced the Empire's own forces. At last, Yowon's lips curved into a calm, merciless smile. He stated with certainty that he had warned them already. No one was running away. This place had been sealed as their grave. Yowon let out a thunderous roar and issued his command. He proclaimed himself Chun Yowon, the 2nd heavenly demon of the great heavenly demon divine cult, and ordered the annihilation of every enemy present. The declaration alone made the gathered warriors of Yulin tremble. The name he claimed was the same title once borne by a tyrant who had walked a path of absolute domination, and Yimok felt a chill course through him as he realized what Yowon was declaring by invoking it. With a deafening surge of battle cries, the warriors of the demonic cult advanced as one, their killing intent flooding Jin Castle. In response, the forces of the Blue Heaven Society, the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect, and the Unorthodox Alliance drew their weapons and braced themselves for war. For Gal Mojam, however, the battlefield turned into a living nightmare. The moment he saw the man wielding 2 swords, memories from the past resurfaced with brutal clarity. Junwang moved with visible delight, choosing his target without hesitation. His gaze locked onto Gal Mojam, and he decided to claim that head first. Gal Mojam clenched his teeth, frustration and dread mixing together. He had known this would happen. The unrivaled sword would come for him before anyone else. Junwang burst forward in a blur. Gal Mojam raised his defenses at once, but another blade intercepted Junwang's strike mid-motion. The one who stepped in was No Dokyung, one of the 6 martial masters of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. He rebuked Junwang for seeking out weaker prey despite his strength. Gal Mojum released a breath he had not realized he was holding, relief washing over him for a brief instant, followed immediately by humiliation at being labeled weak. Dokyung paid no attention to Gal Mojum's reaction. With a subtle gesture, he relayed instructions to those behind him, directing them to split the remaining Yulin forces and assault the podium while he held Junwang back. Gal Mojum seized the opening and rallied the 18 Riverways, ordering them to strike directly at the demonic cult leader. As his subordinates acknowledged the command, Dokyung focused entirely on Junwang. He evaded the massive great sword with minimal movement, remarking on how effortlessly Junwang handled such a weapon, and acknowledging his status as one of the 5 great martial artists. Junwang's eyes gleamed with excitement. He noted privately how refined Dokyung's footwork was, dodging each attack without taking more than a few steps, and wondered whether the man truly believed he could evade him indefinitely. Steel collided again and again as their swords clashed, sparks flying with every exchange. Neither side gained the upper hand. Without ever having faced Dokyung before, Junwang immediately recognized that the old master's skill stood on the same level as his own. Junwang commented that he had never expected to find such an aged yet formidable warrior in Yulin. Dokyung replied with calm arrogance, acknowledging Junwang's worth and stating that only with the passage of more years would he be able to overpower him. Words meant to provoke were directed at Dokyung, suggesting that if he truly desired a worthy opponent, he should face the demonic cult's lord himself. The moment those words reached him, Dokyung's expression hardened. He dismissed the provocation as empty bravado and made it clear that the demonic cult's lord already had something prepared for him. Until then, Junwang would have to face him. Junwang accepted it without hesitation. The exchange had been enough. In his view, the warm-up was over. The battle would now begin in earnest. Elsewhere on the battlefield, events were unfolding far from the original plan. Contrary to expectations, the warriors of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect and the Blue Heaven Society were being steadily pushed back. The demonic cult's forces advanced relentlessly, blades flashing as they carved through resistance. Inside Namgung, irritation surged. The Morum Alliance members were interfering constantly, disrupting any attempt to coordinate an assault on Yowon. The plan had always been to strike him together, overwhelming him through numbers. But Yowon was nowhere in sight. Even so, the objective had not changed. The masters of the Morum Alliance had already been drawn into direct combat, and the battlefield had fully erupted. Then Namgung was spotted. The demonic cult's warriors charged toward him the moment they identified their target. Namgung responded instantly, releasing his flame sword technique and cutting down those who rushed him, his movements sharp and decisive. While defending himself, he searched for the remaining leaders of the Berserk Saber. His eyes quickly found them. Yimok had already engaged Lee Wook, moving without hesitation the instant the war began, and choosing him as his opponent. The clash between the two was catastrophic. Lee Wook's energy tore into the ground, splitting stone and earth apart. The terrain fractured violently as his power surged, chunks of rock ripping free and soaring into the air. His delight was evident as the battlefield itself bent under his technique. In a single motion, he hurled those fragments forward together with 3 air swords, launching them all toward Yimok at once. Yimok responded by pushing his chi to its limits, shattering the incoming stones, while desperately trying to escape the encirclement. Even so, the technique left him shaken. Each fragment carried force comparable to a divine finger flick, every piece a lethal projectile. The shattered rock splintered further, and the fragments tore through the air with terrifying power. Warriors who strayed too close were pierced instantly, bodies falling before they even realized what had struck them. Shouts rang out as both sides were forced to retreat from the destructive radius of their battle. From a distance, Namgung watched in stunned awe as fear crept into him. This was the level of combat between truly supreme experts. At this rate, coordinating a joint assault on Yowon would be impossible. Then a familiar presence reached him. Tang Pilsoon's signal arrived, drawing Namgung's attention. Not far away, Tang Pilsoon was already positioned much closer to where Yowon stood. Namgung reacted with alarm. Reaching that area should have been impossible with the demonic cult's guardian warriors still active. Tang Pilsoon directed his attention sideways. The unorthodox alliance was currently locked in fierce combat with the demonic cult's guardian martial artists, creating a narrow opening. It was through that chaos that they had advanced. With that explanation given, Tang Pilsoon made his intention clear. He urged Namgung to observe carefully. Namgung stiffened in shock the moment he realized what Tang Pilsoon intended to do. The Vice Patriarch revealed the final bottle of formless poison, calmly accepting that this act would cost him his life. It was the Tang clan's ultimate toxin, odorless, tasteless, and so lethal that mere contact with skin guaranteed death within minutes. Its danger was so absolute that it had long been forbidden by the Morum Alliance, with its recipes and remaining vials supposedly destroyed before all the masters. Namgung was seized by fear. He knew this was madness. He urged Tang Pilsoon to wait, to act only after the Supreme Martial Physique was activated, but Tang Pilsoon had already made his decision. He believed time was running out. If he hesitated, the opportunity would be lost. He resolved to drag the demonic cult leader into death with him, even if it meant his own annihilation. Namgung did not stop him. Instead, he chose to remain where he was, bearing witness to what he believed would be a heroic sacrifice. Moving with extreme caution, Tang Pilsoon advanced step by step. Poison use was despised throughout Yulin, branded as dishonorable. This was why the strongest warriors were judged by blade and fist alone, and why figures like poison masters were excluded from recognition. Tang Pilsoon understood this better than anyone, and yet he moved forward regardless. When he reached the point of no return, he raised the vial and drank it in one motion. The poison ignited inside his body like liquid fire. Even with his lifelong tolerance to toxins, the agony was unbearable. His insides felt as though they were being torn apart. A scream tore from his throat as purple poisonous energy erupted from his body, seeping out like smoke and flame. Inside, Tang Pilsoon endured hell. Countless poisons had passed through him before, but this was different. This was annihilation. Still, he welcomed it. If his death could kill the demonic cult leader, then the Blue Heaven Society would prevail. The Tang clan's name would echo across Zhongyuan, feared and revered. The battlefield froze. Even the warriors of the Berserk Saber halted mid-motion as they stared in disbelief. Tang Pilsoon stood there, his entire body engulfed in corrosive poisonous energy, his presence alone warping the air around him. From afar, Namgung watched with wide, trembling eyes. The sheer potency of the poison was melting everything nearby. Stone, weapons, flesh. Nothing could endure it. In his heart, he was convinced this was enough. No one could survive such poison. This had to be the end. The demonic cult's warriors rushed to intercept, but the moment they drew close, the poison surged outward. Those who touched it dissolved instantly, bodies melting as if consumed by invisible flames. Fear rippled through the battlefield as fighters recoiled in horror. The masters of the Berserk Saber retreated as well, instinctively widening the distance. This was the opening Tang Pilsoon had been waiting for. Tang Pilsoon screamed that they would descend into hell together and hurled himself forward. Yowon merely glanced back. As the poisonous energy surged closer, Yowon's skin began to corrode, flesh visibly melting under the terrifying toxin. Tang Pilsoon's face twisted with fanatical resolve as he believed victory was finally within reach. Justice, he thought, would be served at this very moment. But then, 2 steps before reaching the podium, Tang Pilsoon was lifted into the air. His body froze mid-motion, suspended by an invisible force. Shock exploded inside him. He instantly recognized the technique: void capture. The realization struck like a hammer. The difference in their chi reserves was not just large, it was absolute. Still, he clung to hope. He was close enough. Even if seized, the poison should already be working. Then he saw it. Yowon's melting flesh was restoring itself at a terrifying speed. The corroded skin reformed, muscles knit together, and even the poison-inflicted damage vanished as if it had never existed. Tang Pilsoon's confidence shattered. The poison was not working. Panic seized him, and in desperation he made his final decision. If poison could not kill Yowon, then he would destroy himself. By detonating the formless poison within his own body, he could unleash an explosion of toxic energy spanning dozens of meters, enough to erase everything nearby, leaving not even bones behind. But before he could act, his body grew unnaturally cold. The burning agony vanished, replaced by creeping numbness. Frost spread across his limbs, crawling over his skin in an instant. His thoughts slowed as terror replaced resolve. He realized too late that his body was no longer under his control. Yowon's voice descended upon him like a death sentence. Yowon saw through his intent and refused to allow such an outcome. Tang Pil-soon would not take anyone with him. With a single motion, Yowon struck the frozen body and sent it flying beyond the castle walls. The air split as the frozen corpse shot outward. A deafening crash followed, accompanied by an explosion outside the fortress. Black smoke rose into the sky, visible even from within the castle. Namgung stood frozen in place, unable to speak. His mind struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The ultimate poison of the Tang clan had been rendered meaningless. Not only that, it had been suppressed, neutralized, and discarded as if it were nothing. Namgung understood then that Tang Pil-soon's death had been utterly futile. Yowon's gaze shifted. His attention settled on Namgung, who stood exposed in the center of the battlefield. Yowon calmly named him as the next target, identifying him as the Heaven Master of the Blue Heaven Society. Namgung's heart lurched. Confusion and dread collided within him. The realization that Yowon knew his true identity was impossible, or so he had believed. There was no way this should have been known. Before Namgung could move, a voice rang out behind him that he had been found. Hobum approached, clearly delighted, marveling at how Yowon had identified Namgung even amid the chaos of battle. To Hobum, it was only natural for the Demon Lord to see through everything. What confused him was why someone of Namgung's standing in the Orthodox Murim Alliance was skulking about in such a disorderly clash. Namgung turned, unsettled. He had no idea who this man was. When Hobum introduced himself, the name meant nothing to Namgung, yet the energy radiating from him felt deeply wrong, unfamiliar, distorted, and far stronger than any mere disciple should possess. Hobum drew his sword, and blazing flame chi surged violently from his body. His presence sharpened as he revealed himself as the first disciple of the Demon Lord of the Great Heavenly Demon Divine Cult and a member of the Palace Guards, declaring that he had come to learn through battle. Namgung immediately steadied his stance. Within his mind, caution rose sharply. The flame surrounding Hobum carried an unfamiliar quality, warped and dangerous. Judging him by age alone would be a fatal mistake. Elsewhere, Yowon briefly turned his attention beyond the castle walls, calmly assessing the aftermath of the poison's dispersal. His earlier battle with Baek-oh, the uncanny poison demon's staff, had proven invaluable. Had the toxin been allowed to spread freely across the battlefield, the situation would have unfolded in a manner completely contrary to his intentions. Nearby, the 7 masters of the Berserk Saber sect, who had retreated earlier upon sensing the poison, reappeared. One of them clicked his tongue in irritation, privately lamenting that the poison wielder had failed. Still, opportunity now stood before them. Their confidence swelled. One of the masters, Sung, bared his teeth in satisfaction, convinced that the task of killing Yowon would now fall to their own hands. At Sung's signal, the formation shifted. A sharp sound rang out as he raised the sect's banner, and the remaining 6 masters each moved into precise positions. The 7-star Extreme Blade art was activated. The 7 masters advanced together, their expressions brimming with certainty. Even against a divine master, they believed this formation represented perfection itself, an attack worthy of being called the strongest. Sung's confidence peaked as he concluded that even a warrior of the life and death realm could not be invincible. Yowon remained completely unmoved. His composure did not waver as he regarded them with cold disinterest, dismissing their bravado as meaningless noise. Sung, undeterred, pressed forward, convinced that everything until now had merely been preparation. What followed, he believed, was the ultimate manifestation of the 7-star Extreme Blade art. Yowon's eyes gleamed faintly. He immediately recognized it was no longer a mere formation. Force chi surged outward in flawless trajectories, blue radiance descending upon him without a single opening. With a casual flick of his saber, Yowon intercepted the attack, dispersing the energy with absolute precision. Inside his mind, Yowon issued a command, registering the technique as the 7-star Ultimate Blade Array. The system confirmed the successful analysis and recording of the opponent's attack patterns. Only then did Yowon move. In a gesture that stunned everyone present, he calmly sheathed his saber. Laughter broke out among the 7 masters, mistaking the act for retreat. They surged forward, convinced that he was attempting to escape. At that instant, black force chi erupted from Yowon's body. The air itself seemed to recoil as his black wrist guard unfolded piece by piece. From within it emerged a sword, drenched in demonic presence, its aura so oppressive that words failed to capture the dread it inspired. Horror seized them all. Their eyes widened, color draining from their faces as death closed in. Yowon did not hesitate. He made it clear that none of them would be allowed to escape. His body moved for the first time. In a single breath, his form split apart, 7 afterimages erupting simultaneously. He slipped through the smallest gaps in their formation, as if the array itself had opened a path for him. Shock overtook the 7 masters. Their minds could not comprehend how one man could be present in every opening at once. The heavenly demon sword answered Yowon's will. Its path was absolute. The blade carved through all 7 bodies in a single flowing sequence, tearing them apart as blood sprayed outward. Before their disbelief could settle, their lives were extinguished, their bodies collapsing lifelessly to the ground. The system confirmed that the 7-star ultimate blade array had been completely broken and that the user's attack patterns had been recorded. Deep within his thoughts, Yowon judged the result calmly. The technique had been easy to dismantle because he already understood the Berserk Saber's divine martial arts. The flaws were clear. Once corrected and passed down to his cult, this technique would never threaten them again. This war would force his followers to grow stronger, and only through that growth would they be worthy of walking the path he had chosen. Elsewhere on the battlefield, 2 figures clashed violently. Their bodies collided mid-air several times before both landed heavily on the ground. It was the great leader of Yulin, Yi Mok, facing Swordmaster Lee Wook. Within himself, Lee Wook felt irritation harden into urgency. He had not expected Yi Mok to withstand him for this long. The misjudgment was costly. He needed to end this fight quickly and regroup with the remaining leaders to eliminate the demonic cult leader. Then his eyes shifted. The realization struck him like a blade. The battle between Yowon and the 7 masters was already over. Lee Wook's teeth ground together as he understood the truth. Every one of them was dead. With no alternatives left, he reached for his final option. He roared for his subordinates to execute Plan B. The command took effect instantly. The eyes of the remaining 65 warriors of the Berserk Saber sect turned crimson. Their muscles swelled grotesquely, tearing apart the clothing on their upper bodies as their frames expanded into monstrous proportions. The demonic blood reversal art had been unleashed. Shock rippled through the battlefield. Warriors nearby recoiled in alarm, recognizing the transformation. Those who hesitated were torn apart before they could retreat, ripped open by claws that no longer resembled human hands. The transformed warriors declared their supremacy, proclaiming that this was not the inferior, incomplete technique known to the world, but the perfected blood reversion divine art. Namgung, still locked in combat with Hobum, sensed the drastic shift across the castle grounds. Inside his mind, calculation replaced surprise. If the Berserk Saber sect had been forced to reveal this trump card, it meant the situation was already tilting in Yowon's favor. Holding back their own final move was no longer an option. Namgung lifted the flute hanging at his neck and blew into it. The sound pierced through the chaos of battle. As the note spread across the field, several faction leaders aligned with his organization reached into their robes and retrieved items they had prepared long in advance. Their hands each held a needle. After drawing in a deep breath, they pierced a precise blood vessel at the junction between the neck and the back. They declared their loyalty to the blue heaven as the needles sank in. Blood burst out and cries of pain rang across the field. To onlookers, the act was incomprehensible. Yet the warriors of the demonic cult did not hesitate. They surged forward and struck while the enemy appeared momentarily stiff. Blades flashed, arms were severed, limbs torn away, but the result was horrifying. The injuries did nothing. Those men did not slow, did not cry out, did not even flinch. Their strength had surged unnaturally, every swing of their weapons carrying enough force to cut a man down in a single blow. Even after an arm was cut off, the Blue Heaven fighters continued attacking with blank expressions, their movements untouched by pain or loss. Elsewhere, Ya Wukeng continued his battle against Markim. His blade swept down, but Markim dissolved into an afterimage and slipped past the strike. He reappeared behind Wukeng, forcing a curse from Wukeng's lips. Another slash followed. Markim ducked low and evaded it once more. Markim seized the hilt of his sword and poured force chi into the strike, slashing directly through Wukeng's body. The blade rebounded as if it had struck reinforced steel. Wukang grinned with exhilaration at the closeness of the exchange. He brought his blade down again, but Markham vanished once more, and the strike smashed into the ground instead. Markham assessed him carefully. Wukang's entire body felt as if it had been forged from steel. To damage him, Markham would need to draw out every fragment of chi he possessed. Wukang ground his teeth in frustration, demanding how long Markham thought he could continue dodging. Then Wukang's gaze shifted across the battlefield. At the same moment, Markham received a telepathic message from Yowon, informing him that the time had come to conclude the plan. Wukang pointed toward the chaos unfolding around them and drew Markim's attention to it. Warriors who had activated the perfected blood reversion divine art were tearing through the demonic cult's ranks with terrifying momentum. Wukang's grin widened. The opening act was finished, and the true massacre had just begun. Markham responded coldly, recognizing that Wukang himself had ignited the fuse that would lead to widespread slaughter. Before Wukang could reply, his expression changed. Something felt wrong. The air itself shifted, as though someone had stepped upon it. His eyes lifted. The lord of the demonic cult was standing in midair. A shout of disbelief echoed, as such a feat could not go unnoticed. The stepping skill of the wind god had been revealed. Even the warriors of the demonic cult were stunned as they watched their lord walk calmly through the air. Yimok realized at once that what he was witnessing was fundamentally different from forming footholds of air with inner energy. This was not the act of stepping upon condensed chi. Yowon was truly flying. From across the battlefield, Lee Wook felt a surge of frustration twist his insides. He could not comprehend what the demonic cult leader intended to do, yet a deep sense of dread crept over him. Yowon's declaration echoed across the castle grounds, cold and final. Whatever would happen from this point onward was the direct consequence of their own choices. Confusion spread through the ranks. Many could not grasp the meaning behind his words, nor understand why he had risen into the air above the heart of the castle. Then the ground began to tremble. A deep vibration rolled through Jin Castle, shaking stone and bone alike. Warriors who had collapsed from exhaustion felt their weapons suddenly tug away from their grasp. Swords, spears, and blades tore free and rose into the air against their will. Lee Wook urged everyone not to give in to panic, asserting that Yowon's intent was forced disarmament of his enemies by stripping them of their weapons. High above them, Yowon released his inner energy in full. Hundreds of swords, each infused with dense chi, hovered obediently in the sky around him. The Orthodox Murim Alliance was struck speechless. This was no simple sword aura, nor ordinary chi manipulation. The sheer scale of chi sword control defied everything they believed possible for a human martial artist. Yowon gazed down upon the battlefield and issued a silent command. Within his vision, countless targeting lines appeared as NANO activated its multi-lock system. Enemy after enemy was designated without error. When the final target was marked, Yowon raised his internal energy to its peak. A cruel grin crossed his face as he prepared to unveil the technique he had forged for himself, the Heaven Flash. What followed was terror. With a single motion of his hands, the suspended swords answered his will and they descended. The sky itself seemed to shatter as the blades rained down like a storm of falling stars. Panic erupted. Warriors screamed, scattered, and tried desperately to flee, but there was nowhere to escape. In an instant, the screams turned into agonized wails. Bodies were pierced, crushed, and torn apart as the air sword struck with devastating precision. Yet amid the chaos, a horrifying realization spread. The swords were not indiscriminate. Every blade flew only toward Yowon's enemies. Those aligned with him remained untouched, standing amid the carnage in stunned silence. Witnesses could only stare in disbelief at the impossible control and merciless accuracy. The castle grounds were bathed in blue light as the air sword smashed down like a meteor shower. It was no longer a battle. It was annihilation. Screams tore through the battlefield as panic spread among the unorthodox forces. Many of them, far weaker than the elites at the center, collapsed into chaos, unable to comprehend the power descending upon them. Desperate cries for help echoed, mixed with disbelief that such overwhelming force could originate from a single human being. The leaders of the 18 River families shouted orders, urging their warriors to defend themselves, but the commands were swallowed by carnage. What answered their shouts were only dying screams. One of Gal Mojam's subordinates rushed toward him in desperation, trying to warn him that their troops were no longer responding and that retreat was the only option left. Before the warning could be completed, an invisible blade swept through the air. The man's head was severed instantly, blood spraying across Gal Mojam's face. Terror seized him. A Supreme Peak master had been beheaded in a single strike. Before he could even process that horror, another air sword screamed toward him. He barely twisted aside. His blade met it in defense, but the impact shattered his sword into fragments. More swords rained down like divine punishment. Stone exploded beneath his feet as he staggered back, yet one blade still carved into his leg. Agonizing pain tore through his body, and he collapsed face first onto the ground, unable to rise. Within his thoughts, despair settled completely. Even if Chun Yo-won had reached the life and death realm, Gal Mojam had believed that the combined might of three great forces could overwhelm him. Now, faced with this reality, he understood the truth. This was a being capable of slaughtering them all alone. That realization ended as another storm of swords descended toward him. The head of the Miram Alliance could only stare as the scene unfolded and declare the truth aloud in his heart. The heavenly demon had returned to the Jianghu. The warriors of the Blue Heaven Society continued to advance even as their bodies were torn apart. Watching this, Yo-won calmly analyzed them and issued a precise command to Nano, ordering that only their heads be targeted. The adjustment was immediate. The moment the swords began crushing skulls instead of limbs, screams finally erupted from the Blue Heaven Society's forces. Namgung watched in disbelief as his followers ceased moving altogether. Rage and dread twisted inside him as he realized Yo-won's intent was not simply to kill, but to erase them from the battlefield completely. Hobum observed the fallen enemies and noted with cold clarity that while they had been stripped of pain, they had not been stripped of fear. Death still claimed them in the end. With that, he turned his focus back to the battle before him, ready to finish what remained. Enraged beyond restraint, Namgung abandoned all hesitation and charged forward, unleashing the ultimate technique of the ruler's blade, the unmoving sword flurry. Hobum answered head-on, releasing the sword of illusion. Flame chi erupted violently from his body as the two techniques collided. Steel met fire, sparks scattering as Namgung pressed his assault relentlessly, refusing to grant even a moment's respite while the battlefield around them drowned beneath the shadow of the heavenly demon's wrath. Namgung realized deep within that with countless sword aura projectiles flying through the air, defending himself had become nearly impossible. Before he could complete the thought, blazing flame chi tore through his arm. The heat scorched flesh and bone alike, and pain flooded his senses. Unable to endure any longer, Namgung collapsed to his knees. Rage and humiliation twisted his expression as he cursed his defeat, unable to accept that he had fallen to an opponent he considered insignificant. At that moment, Wang Hul shouted an order, calling on the warriors of the great heavenly demon divine cult to support their lord. They surged forward at once, cutting down the remaining enemy warriors without mercy, bodies falling one after another beneath their blades. Amid the chaos, Wu Kang urgently transmitted a telepathic message to Dokyung and Lee Wook, warning that if this continued, they would all perish and suggesting retreat. Lee Wook responded with restrained fury, claiming that they still had one final method left. Wu Kang questioned him, and Lee Wook explained that no matter how monstrous Yo-won was, even a martial artist of the life and death realm possessed limits. He insisted that Yo-won's chi reserves would eventually be exhausted, and that all they needed was to endure a little longer. Moments later, a violent tremor shook the ruined castle grounds. The swords that had been gleaming like stars in the sky lost their brilliance and fell silent. There was only one possible conclusion. Yo-won's internal energy had finally been depleted. As Yo-won descended toward the ground, no longer able to remain suspended in the air, Lee Wook's eyes gleamed with triumph. He declared that the moment they had been waiting for had arrived. Shouts of alarm erupted from the demonic cult's warriors, who cried out in fear for their lord. Ignoring them, the three sword masters of the Berserk Saber of Six Martial Arts sect lunged forward simultaneously. Lee Wook laughed openly, mocking Yo-won and declaring that he had waited for this very moment. Yet Yo-won was smiling. A chilling, ominous aura surged from his body, sending a shudder through the three attackers. In his left hand, Yo-won manifested a cold ice sword, while a blazing flame sword formed in his right. The instant the weapons appeared, all three masters recognized them at once. Invisible sword. In that instant, they understood that they had been deliberately drawn in. There was no retreat now. Dokyung unleashed the first codified form of the Berserk Divine Martial Arts. Wu Kang followed with the sixth codified form of Ultimate Sword Mastery, Dragon's Ascension. Yo-won surged forward to meet them head-on, striking with the Heavenly Demon Sword art from his right hand. From behind, Lee Wook roared in fury, pouring every ounce of hatred he carried for his fallen brother into his strike. He unleashed the seventh codified form of the Berserk Divine Saber Martial Arts, the Blade of Death. Yoan responded by releasing the second codified form of the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts, executing the ultimate sword form with his left hand and directing it straight at Lee Wook. Lee Wook froze in shock as he realized Yoan was wielding the very martial arts of the Berserk Saber sect. Even Dokyeong was momentarily shaken, unable to comprehend how an outsider could possess such intimate mastery over their sacred techniques. The clash of force chi was dazzling and violent, so overwhelming that everyone within Jin Castle held their breath. The shockwaves alone were enough to make seasoned warriors tremble, as Yoan simultaneously endured and countered multiple supreme techniques that would have been nearly impossible to block even individually. Yoan swept both invisible swords through the air, and the surrounding space was swallowed by black flames and freezing cold. Dokyeong clenched his teeth as black fire devoured his arms, the flames crushing through even his 3 divine fires. Wukang fared no better, barely enduring the pressure as frustration and dread surged within him. Lee Wook felt terror take hold as he sensed the terrifying refinement of Yoan's techniques. The execution was far more complete than his own, despite the fact that only the highest-ranking elders were permitted to learn those arts. Worse still, the black ice blade froze the very space it passed through, the suffocating cold tightening around his heart and threatening to overwhelm him entirely. At this rate, he could not be certain he would survive another exchange. Even so, yielding was not an option, for the balance of power would collapse the moment they faltered. He had believed that the 3 of them together could bring Yoan down, but he now understood the brutal truth. Someone who had reached the life and death realm stood on a completely different plane. Yoan calmly judged the situation and shifted his focus. His black ice sword smashed into Wukang's blade, hurling him backward, while the black flame sword struck Lee Wook head on. The impact flung Lee Wook away, rupturing his internal organs as blood burst from his mouth. With Wukang isolated, Yoan descended upon him. Lee Wook tried to warn him, but Wukang already knew escape was impossible. Yoan drove the black ice sword into Wukang's shoulder. Confident in the steel-like durability of his body, Wukang laughed, until the cold began spreading instantly from the wound. The freezing power tore through him in an instant. His scream echoed across the battlefield as the sword cleaved his upper body in 2. His bisected form collapsed to the ground, froze solid, and shattered into countless fragments upon impact. Dokyeong watched in sheer horror as the reality set in. Yoan had frozen part of the Berserk Blade Sect leader's body and used that opening to break through an exterior once thought unbreakable. Yoan did not allow him even a moment to recover. Closing the distance, he launched another relentless assault. Dokyeong struggled desperately to defend, but each impact detonated with crushing force, driving him closer to despair. He finally understood the truth. The black flame energy could not be resisted. This battle was unwinnable. They could not defeat Yoan. Only the Blade Master himself might have a chance against such a monster. With failure now undeniable, Dokyeong knew there was only one option left: to retreat, survive, and never repeat this mistake again. Only one thought remained with Dokyeong now. If he could save the young man beside him, then his own death would not be meaningless. A rigid smile formed on No Dokyeong's lips as he looked toward Lee Wook. Lee Wook trembled the moment their eyes met, already sensing what Dokyeong intended to do. Lee Wook tried to stop him, but before a single word could leave his mouth, Dokyeong hurled himself at Yoan. In that instant, he unleashed the 7th codified form of the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts, the 8 Immortal Sword Strike. The ground split apart beneath the force of the technique. 8 sword trajectories surged toward Yoan at once, converging with terrifying speed. Yoan stepped forward without hesitation, having already grasped the fatal flaw of that formation. With absolute precision, Yoan drove the black flame sword straight into the center of the formation. The blade pierced directly through No Dokyeong's heart. Blood spilled from Dokyeong's mouth as realization struck him. Yoan had known the weakness from the start. Strength drained from his body, and his sword slipped from his grasp. Yet even then, he did not let go. Summoning the last of his will, Dokyeong wrapped both arms tightly around Yoan. A cracking sound echoed as Dokyeong's upper body swelled grotesquely. The blood reversion divine art activated, muscles bulging far beyond human limits. Laughter burst from Dokyeong's lips as he clung to Yoan. He declared that he had anticipated Yoan's charge toward the center, knowing it was the formation's weakness, and vowed to drag him down together. With all the strength left in his lungs, Dokyeong shouted for the others to flee, declaring that the battle was already over. At the same time, he sent a telepathic message to Lee Wook stating that they had done everything they could and urging him to inform the Blade Master without delay. Deep within himself, Lee Wook accepted the failure. He resolved that this was not the end, that they would plan again, and that next time they would succeed. He shouted for everyone to run and save themselves. The surviving forces of the Unorthodox Alliance, the Blue Heaven Society, and even the remaining warriors of the Berserk Saber fled without looking back. Orders rang out to pursue them and prevent their escape. Warriors of the demonic cult and Yulin surged forward, unwilling to let their enemies slip away. Markim and Junwang pursued Lee Wook, who was desperately fleeing. Two Berserk Saber warriors empowered by Blood Reversion Divine Art blocked their path, sacrificing themselves to buy time. Using that opening, Lee Wook leapt over the wall and escaped. Back at the center of the battlefield, Yoan seized Dokyung by both arms and stretched them apart, breaking free from his grip. Within Dokyung's body, agony surged as his muscles screamed and his bones began to splinter under Yoan's grasp. Even strengthened far beyond a normal martial artist, he could not comprehend how a human could possess such overwhelming grip strength. He sensed his bones being crushed and knew he could not hold on any longer. Still, he accepted it. He had stalled Yoan long enough. If even one key figure escaped, that was enough. Whatever came next no longer mattered. Yoan's gaze locked onto him, cold and absolute, like death itself. He questioned him calmly, asking if that was truly all he had left. Dokyung's body convulsed violently as swollen blood vessels burst beneath his skin. With his remaining strength, he hurled his resolve at Yoan, intending to drag them both into destruction, and believing that even such a monster could not endure what was coming. Yoan responded with a mocking calm, finding the threat tiresome rather than intimidating. In the next instant, violent electric shock surged from Yoan into Dokyung's body. The moment contact was made, Yoan's grip intensified further. Power tore through Dokyung from within, ripping muscle and bone apart as his own strength was turned against him. His screams split the air as his arms were shredded, flesh tearing apart under the overwhelming force. Far from the castle, Lee Wook fled east with everything he had left. The price of his escape weighed heavily on him, having sacrificed comrades and subordinates to survive. Shame burned inside him, but survival mattered more than honor. He resolved to report everything to the Blade Master, to rebuild, to plan again, and to strike back harder next time. He convinced himself that Yoan's victory was temporary, and that a man who possessed so much would eventually lose what he treasured most. That resolve shattered instantly. A burning pain erupted in his chest. Blood spilled from his mouth as he froze mid-stride. Looking down, he saw black flames consuming his body from the inside. The black flame sword had pierced straight through his chest. Understanding dawned too late. He turned his head toward Jin Castle with disbelief etched across his face as life drained from his eyes and his body collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Several miles away, beyond the Bihyun Mountains, a lone figure stood atop the plains, calmly observing the distant Jin Castle. He had remained there for nearly half an hour without shifting his gaze. Even from such a distance, his presence carried immense pressure. Beside him stood a man wrapped in bandages, struggling to comprehend what his master perceived. No matter how hard he focused, he could sense nothing from that far away, yet the figure before him had not looked away even once. That man was the Blade Lord, the head of the Berserk Saber of 6 martial arts sect. The bandaged subordinate sensed a surge of fury radiating from the Blade Lord, and felt dread settle deep within him. The possibility that even the Chi Blade sect leader's grand plan had failed sent chills through his body. Without warning, the Blade Lord drew his sword. In a single flash, the blade swept past the subordinate's head. He ducked in terror as the strike carved through jagged rocks behind him, pulverizing stone with terrifying ease. Cold fear flooded his mind as he realized the sheer magnitude of that power, questioning whether the Blade Lord had already stepped into a divine territory beyond all others. The Blade Lord calmly sheathed his sword and declared their departure. The subordinate, still shaken, suggested contingency plans and elite squads that could still be deployed. His words were met with quiet finality. The Blade Lord stated that the battle was already decided and that nothing could reverse its outcome. Yet there was no regret in his tone. Instead, satisfaction lingered beneath his composure. When pressed for an explanation, the Blade Lord's lips curved into a grin filled with dark delight. At last, he had found the demon god. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.